5 months and everything was going well. I'd finally gotten the hang of everything and had finally been able to get a full night's rest. 1 month and we'd be in. It was insanely expensive, and I'd had to dip my hand into the billions my ancestors had saved, as well as the funds from the many businesses in Europe my pack owned, hence all the paperwork. The house would be built deep in the Austrian and Swiss Alps, where no one would ever accidentally stumble across, only 20 minutes away by car as well. It was going to be amazing, but we were so close to the merging and I knew that this was the time that if something went wrong, it would go terribly wrong. The construction of the new pack house was very stressful. I had to fit nearly 750 wolves into one giant building, but first I had to build it and make sure that not only were there enough bathrooms and bedrooms for the current and future pack members, but I'd also need to build 2 giant kitchens, living and media rooms, dining rooms, offices and laundries and garages. I'd need a freaking parking lot, otherwise there'd be arguments when pack members blocked others' cars. I sighed and ran a hand through my hair as someone knocked on my office door. "Come in," I yelled. Matthias walked in, frowning. "Alpha Huntington has been spotted at the borders, and will be here within the hour. Should we detain him?" I frowned and clicked a pen a few times, thinking it over before shaking my head. "Take 50 men and go meet them, and escort him to my office. Offer any men he bought refreshments." He nodded, and left, as I twirled a pen in my fingers. Why would Will run all the way from his territory to mine? Why didn't he call or give any prior warning? What the hell was going on? I had a bad feeling about this, and it was only getting worse by the minute. I pushed back my chair and ran down to the infirmary in the basement. "Where is Dr. Gregory?" I asked one of the nurses. She pointed to a small office over to the side and I nodded. "Thanks, Alpha," he said, bowing until he noticed the look on my face. "Is something wrong?" I nodded, distracted, and looked around. "I have a bad feeling. I can't explain it, but please make sure that the infirmary is fully equipped to deal with any injured parties." He nodded, bowed slightly, and then rushed away, firing orders at the nurses. I left him and grabbed something from the kitchen before heading back to my office to deal with the construction workers' fees and the sale of the other 3 pack houses. I was tempted to keep the current pack house as my own, but I knew that I need to live with the pack and be on hand if something arose. That's why I'd built myself my own space, a loft complete with an office, kitchenette, bathroom and small bedroom divided by living room. I'd turn this one into a school for the high school and primary school kids so that their mums didn't have to teach them, which in turn would provide jobs for the pack members who taught and gave the women time away from their kids, time to train or relax. I'd start the renovations once we were settled into the new pack house. I wrinkled my nose at the muffin on my table and pushed it away lightly. I couldn't have eaten anything even if I wanted. When Matthias pushed open my door half an hour without knocking and a grim expression, I knew that it was bad. We exchanged looks before I stood and ran after him to the infirmary, when hundreds of wolves were lying on stark white beds, groaning in pain. "What happened?" My voice boomed around the basement, and everyone stopped talking. I looked round, arms crossed, and searched for the one who could give me answers, finding him lying in his back, with deep lacerations bleeding from his front. I walked up to Will and growled down at him. "You don't call. You trespass on my territory with your entire pack. What the fuck happened?" He coughed and blinked, trying to clear the fog I could see settling over his eyes. "Rouges, hunters." I felt a migraine coming on as he passed out, and I gestured for the doctor. "If he dies, you won't be a doctor for much longer," I threatened. Will's death was one thing I didn't need. He had no siblings and no heir, so the pack would go to me as the nearest alpha. Plus, he was a fairly good friend and I needed those. "Yes, Alpha." I ran into my office and I honestly just wanted to bash my head against the wall. I picked up the phone and dialed the mobile number of the site manager for the pack house and tapped my fingers as it dialed. "Hello? Carl, it's Jenna. Something's come up and I need you to finish the pack house in the next week. Fully operational plumbing, electricity, everything apart from personal possessions. I don't care what you have to do, but make it happen." I hung up the phone and rested my face in my hands. The phone rang and I debated letting it ring. "Night. Hey Jenna, I have 2 pack members over here who desperately want to move packs. Hearing this made me smile. Let me guess. Davy and Keegan? I asked Miller, staring at a photo of me and Dad when I was 2, before he became distant. Tell them that I'll accept them into the pack after I've merged everyone and we've settled into the new pack house. He chuckled and I knew that he was probably nodding. Yeah, I told them that's probably what you'd say. I have no problem with them leaving as I know you'd take care of them. I swallowed and shook my head. I'm up to elbows in shit right now. I don't want them to get involved right now. What happened? There was a knock at my door and I placed a hand over the receiver. Come in. I watched as the door opened, and Matthias walked in with a shaking woman. I held up my hand and gestured for her sit as I spoke. Will and his pack just showed up after running for days. Flynn, there were only 70 or so wolves and all were battered, bruised and shaking. The woman jumped slightly as the door clicked shut, and her eyes wildly flew around the room. They were attacked by Rouges. I've gotta go. I'll call you when everything is settled for Davy and Keegan. With that, I hung up and gave a weary smile to the terrified woman in front of me. Her pale skin seemed colorless, while scratches marred her face, and her green eyes were wide and scared. I stood slowly, and grabbed a blanket from one of the couches and laid it over her shaking form. What happened? She licked her lips and snuggled into the blanket as she thought. We were all outside when Rouges attacked, she said as tears dripped down her cheeks. And they killed my family so we ran, she sobbed, cringed and offered her a tissue. I had never been good with crying people and although I knew exactly how she felt, I couldn't deal with her tears. There, I said, patting her back awkwardly before opening the door and gesturing for Matthias. Take her to a room and let her sleep. I want patrols doubled for the few miles around the house, and all pack members are not to go running until we're certain that the Rouges didn't follow them here. I told him. He nodded and walked inside, gently helping the sobbing girl off the chair and handed her over to Hansel. Jen, you're doing great. Your dad would be so proud of you. He whispered in my ear as he gave me a quick hug. He was like an uncle, the proud uncle, while Hunter was the one who was more like a best friend and Yanis had always been the one who I always caused mayhem with. He left as a small smile slipped onto my face, and I collapsed onto a couch. I missed physical contact, hugs from people who actually cared for me. I found myself missing the warm feeling I had gotten around the short period of time I'd been around Klaus. I missed those kisses we shared, and the bond we had. I shook myself out of those thoughts, and stared out of the window to the starry night sky. Was it possible those Rouges were Klaus and his pack? Would they do something like that? Ace, get to my office now. I ordered through the pack link that I usually tried to avoid. There were so many voices as I heard every thought and feeling every single one of my pack members had and felt if I opened my mind. I sat behind my desk and stared at the door as it opened, and Ace walked in quietly, clicking the door shut and taking a seat. I leant forward and slid a finger over the map. I'd lain out on my table and pointing to where Will's territory was highlighted. Ace, I gather that you've heard about the attack on Alpha Huntington's pack? I asked. He nodded slowly, watching me with sad eyes and choosing to keep quiet. And you know that Rouges killed over half his pack? Again he nodded as my finger circled England. And I know that you know exactly where Klaus is. I watched as his shoulders tensed and his eyes widened. So my question is, Ace, where is your bastard Alpha Rouge now? I growled, slamming my hand down over Will's pack house. Did he do this, Ace? He stood, pushing back the chair so it slammed to the floor and tightened his fists. Don't you dare accuse him of this. What good would it do for him to attack a pack? He growled at me. I shook my head and stood, throwing my heads up into the air. I don't know, Ace. I don't know any of you. I can't deal with this shit anymore, so you either tell me if Klaus is in England or I kick you out of my territory and ban you from seeing Hansel. I threatened. It hurt to do this to a friend, but I was so close to snapping and I couldn't take any more. His eyes narrowed at me as they began turning black. His muscles quivered and bone cracked as he shifted in front of me. I knew this would happen if I threatened his body with Hansel, but honestly I needed a good fight. I could beat Ace and he needed to learn his place. I was his friend. But first and foremost, I am his alpha now. He tackled me, and we both went soaring out of the window, 3 stories down to the ground. I pushed him away, shifting in midair, and landed on 4 paws. We faced off and lunged at each other at the same time, biting and clawing as we reared up on our back legs. I snarled and scratched his neck, biting at his face savagely as he backed away, falling onto his back in his rush. I dove onto him and wrapped my mouth around his throat before he could move, biting down until I drew blood and he licked my face as a sign of submission. I let him go and shifted. When Ace stood up and shook out his fur before shifting, I growled and punched him right in the face. Looking over my shoulder toward Matthias, who stood with the pack who was spilled out, I nodded toward Ace. Take him to a cell. He can spend the night there and think about the consequences to his actions and loyalties while he's at it. He nodded and seized Ace, dragging him away. Somebody clean this mess up, I ordered, pointing to the glass. Thank you for helping us, Jen. I'm forever in your debt, Will said, pulling me into a hug. I was barely clothed and covered in blood, both mine and Ace's, but Will didn't seem to care. I pushed him off me and forced a tight smile. Thank me after we come back from England. At his confused look, I continued. You and I are flying back to your pack house with 70 men of my men, and however many of yours who want to come along. The rest of my pack will stay behind and guard the remaining members of your pack and mine. His eyes widened, and he dragged me in for another hug, and I let him hold me for a few seconds before pushing him away. So get your shit together. I want to be there and back within the week. I had to make sure that the house was packed up and sort out how we'd all move into the new house, allocate rooms and handle the fights that were bound to start, though I was more than certain that there would be a lot of people finding their mates. It was considered an honor and a rarity to find your mate, and sometimes it took hundreds of years before mates even crossed paths. I guess I'd been lucky. That was until he disappeared. I'm ready when you are, he said, watching me gratefully. Thank you for helping us, Jen. It was silent for a few minutes as his eyes became hunted. We were playing with the kids outside when wolves jumped out of the tree line and began killing anyone they could get. It was a surprise attack. They took out the patrols and then attacked the pack. They killed half and kept killing till we fled, chasing us the whole way. They run us off our own territory. It was the only way to survive. You were the only safe place I could think of, so we ran for days, not sure if they followed. Only a few hours later we encountered hunters who killed 30 more wolves. I patted his hand and stood from where I perched myself next to him on the bed. We'll find the ones who did this and you'll have vengeance. Ready? I looked around my men listened as a low rumble sounded through them. They were infuriated that these rouges had the nerve to wipe out half a pack, and so was I. Slowly, we crept towards where Will's pack house sat quietly, watching for any sign of movement. So far there had been no resistance. We'd taken a boat across the channel and avoided all human activity, running for close to an hour at high speeds. 90 wolves all began advancing on the house, keeping cover under the foliage. We didn't know if they were still here. Although it was silent, I could hear breathing and growling from inside the house, though I'm sure that no one else would hear it. Alpha blood flowed through my veins and gave me better senses than the men around me. I strained my senses, heard the footfall of a rabbit, the scent of blood on the grass. Colors were vivid. I could taste the rouge's blood as if I'd already struck. A leaf crunched, and my head swiveled to the side where one of the younger wolves was frozen. Everything was tense, as we waited to see if any of the rouges had heard, but it remained quiet. In fact, it sounded like they were sleeping. A thought appeared in my head and I backed up before running back to where I'd seen clothes hidden in the trees. I shifted, far enough away that the rouges inside the house wouldn't hear me, and slid on a pair of basketball shorts and a singlet. What are you doing? You could get us all killed. Stop putting yourself in danger. Hansel yelled at me angrily through the pack link. I held back a growl at his tone and walked out of the tree line. They're all sleeping. I can sneak in, kill a few before I get caught, and then I'll give a signal. I told him and the rest of my men. Don't let Huntington's men interrupt before it's time. I saw him nod as he melded into the forest, and I walked out of the tree line quietly. Creeping up to the house, I climbed through a broken window and walked up the stairs, straining my hearing to make sure that they were all still sleeping. I heard moans and bangs coming from a few rooms, and ignored it until I reached a room where there was only one set of snores. I opened the door and crept in, watching as the male rouge slept. I stood at his head and before he could wake, grabbed his head and neck, twisting as a snapping sound echoed through the room. His body went limp, and the snoring sound stopped altogether. I checked his pulse and smiled to myself when there was nothing. I covered him with his blanket so if someone walked in they wouldn't realize immediately that he was dead. I contemplated my next course of action as I slipped out of the door. There were 15 rouges left, and if I took out as many as I could now, it would mean less danger for my warriors, who were probably waiting tensely outside. As I looked at the clock, I knew that soon they would start waking up and I would be in deep shit. Over the next 5 minutes I managed to dispatch 3 more men when I heard someone shuffling around. Weighing my options, I pulled off the basketball shorts and pulled the shirt down so it covered my butt. Opening the door, I sauntered in, arching my back like a cat and yawning. "Babe, oh sorry." I giggled, batting my lashes at the naked man holding his boxers. Slowly backing up, I eyed him and grinned. "Sorry, wrong room." When he smirked and took a step forward, I turned around and bent forward slightly so the shirt rose up and I twisted the door handle before he came up behind me. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, breathing in my ear, moving his hips against my backside. A small smile spread across my face as I turned around and looked up at him through my eyelashes. "Nowhere." He moved his face close to mine and pressed his lips against mine. I moved one of my hands up to the side of his neck, and the other through his hair, gripping the side of his head. Pulling back, I grinned, and then twisted quickly until his neck snapped. I let his body fall to the ground and opened the door, slipping out. There was a growl behind me, and I turned around to see a guy only a few inches taller than me glaring. "Who are you?" I giggled and twirled my hair. "A very fulfilled female," I purred, giving him a cheeky wink. He shook his head and stepped forward. "No, you weren't here last night. Who are you?" My smile dropped, and I knew that it's been caught. "A friend of Alpha Huntington's," I growled, glaring at him. He growled and cracking filled the air as a shaggy sandy brown wolf stood before me. He lunged at me and I grabbed him, hurling him out of a nearby window. My signal. Wolves rushed in as door opened and confused rouges wandered out before they were taken down by furious pack members. Screams and growled echoed through the house as the rouge started fighting back. An arm wrapped around me and I knew that it wasn't one of my men. I smashed the back of my head onto their face and grabbed an arm, smoothly stepping behind them and forcing them to the ground. "Jenna!" A rouge dived towards me and I ducked, grabbing his leg and using all my strength slammed him into the floor, his head bouncing off the ground with a sickening crack. His body went limp and I grabbed the rouge who was trying to get away. Looking around, all the remaining rouges were dead and I know that they were waiting for me to finish him off. "Lock him up in silver and lock him in a cell when we get back. I want answers." "Who sent you?" I calmly asked the rouge who was chained by his arms to a concrete room under the prisons where our prisoners got to know some of our pack members a bit better. He spat at me, and I smiled as I looked over my shoulder to Will. "Would you like to do the honors?" I asked as he nodded and put on a glove. He grasped the fiery hot silver poker and pressed it to the rouge's midsection. An ear-piercing scream echoed around the room and I gave the rouge an innocent smile. "If you'd just tell us who ordered the attacks on Alpha Huntington's pack, we would let you go unharmed," I told him. Like I'd ever let that happen. He snorted and shook his head. "I'm not stupid, girlie. You'll kill me the moment you get what you need." I frowned and clenched my fist. "Then make it less painful for yourself, and tell us who set it up and I'll make it quick," I told him, lying. I wouldn't make it quick. After all, he helped kill half of Will's pack, and I wouldn't let him die without a lot of pain. He shook his head and I nodded to Will who applied it over his nipple. He screamed and thrashed against the restraints, and I sighed. "Tell us who set it up." He shook his head and I chuckled darkly. "I guess you'll end up being a eunuch by the end then." He swallowed and closed his eyes. I could literally hear him silently praying to whatever gods he believed in. They wouldn't help him though. That I was sure of. I turned to Will and Matthias. "He is to be kept alive until I find what I want. Keep questioning him until he breaks." "I won't break!" The rouge screamed after me as I walked towards the door. I chuckled and shook my head, shooting him a knowing look. Oh, you'll be telling me anything I want by the time we're through with you. How is it going? I asked Carl as I walked up the driveway. The entire outside of the gigantic mansion looked amazing, but I knew that there were still a few things to take care of inside. I had left the decorating up to each individual person, and would let them decide how they wanted it, and was tossing up on giving each member $100 for paint, and then letting them pay for anything else, because with nearly 750 wolves, the cost would soon skyrocket. Good. We're just making sure that all the electric and pluming is installed and that they work properly in each room, he said with a smile. It'll be complete in the next week. A smile spread across my face, and it felt like a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulder. Soon the pack would merge. The profit from the 3 old pack's houses would cover most of the money that was spent on building this house, and I could put it back for future use. This was good news, as the new pack house had put a major dent in my funds, and it was no surprise. The new pack house had 8 stories, and spread out over 2 kilometers with a huge backyard and patio. Below ground was the laundry room with all the best washers and dryers, a sewing room that was adjacent, an adult game room with bar and card tables, and a safe room with bunkers and passageways winding underground in case of attack that allowed for escape. The safe room had 3 giant reinforced steel doors, over 1,000 bunk beds, enough food and water to last 5 years, and a system that pumped fresh filtered air through the whole room. When you walked into the building, there was a huge 2-story foyer, complete with 2 joint staircases, that lead into a living room the size of a standard house, a home cinema that was around the same size, a fully equipped gym complete with a pool and 2 game rooms, one for the kids, and the other for teens. The kitchen could fit 200 people easily, with a greenhouse attached to grow fresh produce, and a pantry the size of 3 buses with floor-to-ceiling shelves. Off to the side there were 10 offices for my betas, head enforcers and any visiting alphas, with 2 spare bathrooms for communal use. The remaining 7 stories upstairs were all single bedrooms, with their own bathroom, and joint family apartments that had a small foyer with 3 bedrooms each, and 2 bathrooms. Over 900 bedrooms and 700 bathrooms, and every door has a number. The top level was reserved for my loft that consisted of a bedroom, kitchenette, office, bathroom and small living room. The rest of the space for my betas, and a spare bedroom for any visiting alpha families. Although there were only 700 or so wolves currently, I knew that with the births and joining of new wolves, I'd need to build another building within the next decade or so. Good. How are the prison and training grounds coming along? I asked. I had built them both a mile away, and the prison was complete with silver-reinforced cells, a huge meeting room that could fit the whole pack, another gym with a fighting ring, and another huge football field out the back. The building also contained a separate office for security monitors, as I was having cameras installed in the bottom level of the pack house and the training facilities. It also contained copies of the pack files, and only I had the key and security codes. They'll be finished and totally furnished by the end of the month. The gym in the main house is already fully equipped. I nodded my head as he opened the giant wooden front door. A smile lit my face as I stepped inside. It looked fantastic. Everything was coming together for once, and I was sure I could pull this off. Make sure that everyone is ready and packed by the end of next week, I told Ivan, who was in charge of the Septem Gravissima Piccata clan in my absence. I want them here last after everyone has settled. Can you handle them for another fortnight? I heard him chuckle and then some, the sound of paper rustling. They're harsh, blunt, and extremely dangerous, but they're also loyal, smart, and confident in their abilities. One thing I noticed though is that none are mated. I think that the Pervious Alpha didn't allow them to keep their mates. Maybe you should change that. It would most definitely win their respect and favor. Without batting an eyelash, I told Ivan exactly what to do, all the while gritting my teeth. Tell them that if they have found their mate, and that I will not stand in the way of them mating. Hell, I even encourage it. It gives them something to fight for. I'll tell them immediately. Thank you. I'll see you in a fortnight, I said before hanging up, looking around the office while cracking my fingers. I guess it was time to start packing up some of the books in here. The rouge is cracked. Matthias's voice echoed through my mind as I opened a box. Though he did not sound happy, I literally sprinted to the prison a mile away, and almost slammed open the door to the chamber where the rouge was held, but stopped and collected myself. I strolled in casually, seeming bored, and stood next to Matthias, whose hands were covered in blood as he snarled at the barely conscious rouge. "What did he say?" I asked the moment the door shut behind me. "We took down his confession and made him sign," he said grimly. Turning to the rouge, he slapped his cheek and growled, "Tell Alpha Knight what you told us, Rouge." The rouge coughed, and I watched as he slowly raised his head to look me in the eyes. "We were told that if we attacked Huntington's pack we could have their territory." "Fugo." He slumped forward and I shook my head. "Did you get anything else from him?" I asked Matthias, who held a book and nodded. "Good. Where is Alpha Huntington?" I asked slowly, trying to keep calm. It didn't work. Will had brought danger to my territory. He'd put my men in danger. He'd used my resources, stressed me out, and now he'd lied. I was pissed. It was time for answers. Walking up to the rouge, I twisted his head until it snapped and then stormed out of the room, looking for the one person who would give me answers, or face my wrath. Will stood with his back to me, talking to a few members of my pack. They nodded, smiling at me as he turned around when I pushed him back and held him up against the wall by his throat. "How dare you?" There was total silence as he growled, frowning at me, though I noticed his face had drained of all color. "You come here and you feed me lies. You put my pack in danger and you have the audacity to lie?" I growled as he began thrashing, his face slowly turning blue. I dropped him on his ass and squatted down to his level as he gasped for breath. "You tell me everything now or you'll regret the day you ever met me, William Huntington," I growled, grabbing the collar of his shirt and pulling him up. "So, start talking, now," I barked. He coughed and looked down at the ground. "Fugo sent those wolves." I didn't realize it until when we're on the barge, and I knew that this was the only safe place we could go. My frown deepened as I looked around at the pack members who were listening intently. "Get out!" "Ha!" I yelled at them, grabbing Will's arm and hauling him to my office, throwing him down on a chair. "Talk. After I got into a debt with Fugo years ago, he's been blackmailing me. I don't have the resources to take him out, so I have to go along with it for the sake of my sister." He took a shaky breath and closed his eyes. "He's been using them as leverage for the last 70 years, keeping her locked in that cell, my sister his slave." "What did you do?" I asked after a few minutes' silence. Honestly, I was scared of the answer. Tipped off the hunters, kidnapped pups, and killed mates, framing rouges for it. I growled, and desperately tried not to kill him. For centuries he's slowly been wiping out smaller packs and other species who he considered a threat. He wanted me to kidnap you, Jenna, and I said no. I consider you a friend and he's had a hold on me for far too long. "Get out," I said through gritted teeth. He looked crushed, but I didn't care right now. "Boo! Get out!" I screamed, slamming back my chair, glaring daggers at him. "Get out of my sight before I kill you." He scuttled out of my office and shut the door behind him as I sat fuming. "Don't kill him. Don't kill him. Don't kill him," I repeated to myself over and over in my head before I tracked him down and finished what those rouges started. Pulling my drawer open roughly, I searched for a letter I'd gotten from Nightingale when a rumpled envelope caught my attention. I pulled it out and smoothed it out as I read the front. "Jenna." My name was written in plain print and looked like the letter I'd always seen my dad carry with him. I slid my finger under the closed flap. "Jenna, today you turn 18. Hopefully Hunter will have given you this, though I can't guarantee that he will remember. I really don't know what to say to you. Right now you're inside me, totally dependent on me to keep you safe, feed you. It's not normal, this feeling, not for me. By now you might have heard about me. I killed people, many people, thousands of wolves. I tore families, packs apart. All I am is death and destruction, grief and loss. I've never created life, never cared for much. For the first time in a long time I care about what happens to other people. People I don't know. People who most probably hate me. If you're getting this, then I'm long gone, and I want you to understand that what I did was necessary, and hopefully, it made a difference. Sitting here, I'm not afraid of death. It's been part of my life for so long. I'm sorry I won't be there to give you advice. no matter how shit it may have been. I'm sorry I won't be there to see you grow up and blossom into the beautiful woman you will someday become. I can't say I'm sorry that I died. Thinking about it, it almost seems like a mercy. You're far better off without me, Jenna. I'm not maternal material and I have enemies who would never leave you alone as long as I lived and loved you. There's one thing I always want you to remember though, something I learned as a hunter under the thumb of a man. Don't let anyone tell you what you can and can't do. You can do and be anything you want. In our world, women are looked down upon because they can't shift. You can. Prove them that you're just as strong as any man. Let them underestimate you and then show them what you're made of. Don't let anyone take away your freedom and keep the ones that you hold dear close because people will use them against you. You probably won't believe me when I say this, but I do love you. Probably more than I've loved anything else before. And that's why I'm doing this. I'm doing this so that you have a future. A future where you're safe and hopefully happy. A future where I know that Reeker won't get his grubby hands on you. Look after your dads for me. I know I treated them like shit and please, if you ever find your mate, don't do what I did and hold him at arm's length. He's your mate for a reason. I love you more than you can imagine and I'm sorry. Rory Tannen. I leant against the back of my overstuffed chair, blinking back tears as I stared at the paper. How could she say those things about herself? She seemed almost happy to die, yet obviously she didn't think about the consequences. She broke Dad's heart and scattered the pieces in the wind. When I was 12, I got my first period and I thought I was dying. I ran to Dad, the only thing I could think of at the time, crying, and he awkwardly sent me off to Marty, who dealt with it. The moment I lost my mother, I lost my father. She didn't even deserve to be called my mother, but she was. She'd carried me for 6 months and then died so that I could grow up safe. Hunters were dangerous. They were determined to wipe out all supernaturals, mainly wolves, as we had the biggest population and were easier to find. We lived in packs and all they had to do was find a large group of people living deep in the woods, and presto, they'd found a pack. And then, sometimes, that pack would never be heard from again. Most of the time they'd lose many pack members, but rarely did they ever kill off an entire pack. Who was this Fugo guy? I'd never heard of him. What did he want? Why was he helping hunters, blackmailing other alphas and killing so many wolves? What would he do next? I watched from my apartment in the new pack house, as stragglers from the Ukawa and Druidus Karmasim pack pulled up. I and my original pack had moved in just under a fortnight ago, and we were all settled. While 2 of the 3 packs I'd taken were now in their rooms, only a few families from each pack remained, as well as the Septem Gravissima Picata clan. I wanted the other packs meet and settle in before I introduced the Septems, as they were not known for their kindness. Moving in was fairly straightforward, as each room had a number and each wolf would have a map, room number and key, making it easier for people to get settled. I had all my enforcers patrolling the borders right now and breaking up any fights that could occur. I knew that many wolves would find their mates. I knew that in the coming years there would be many pups born. Good thing there were many extra rooms. I turned from the window and walked to my office, where I needed to set up new patrols, as I knew that some packs and dozens of rouges would begin to encroach on my territory. After all, I did own almost all of Europe and Africa, slowly branching out into Russia. It was a huge expense of land and I knew that I wouldn't use half of it, but it was better to have too much than too little. There was a knock on my door and Matthias entered. The Septem Gravissima Picata has arrived. He left without a word and I stood, running my hands down the side of my black shirt and skinny jeans, making sure I actually wore shoes. A worn pair of combat boots. As I strode down the steps, my pack bowed their head and I gave them all tight smiles. The main door was wide open, and as I walked through it, I was greeted by the sight of roughly 70 men standing in 7 rows of 10. They were all clad in black wife beaters, black cargo pants, and had black combat boots, much like my own, adorning their feet. They stood with their feet shoulder-width apart, hands behind their backs, with blank expressions as they all just stared at me. I stepped forward to greet their 3 commanding officers, with Ivan standing off to the side with Matthias, Giannis, Hunter, Hansel, and Ace. Before I could open my mouth to speak, all 3 had shifted and growled at me before lunging. I knocked one away from me and ducked the other 2 as I shifted and ripped into them. Fur flew everywhere as I sidestepped one wolf, biting the next. They kept coming and I kept resisting them until one bowed out, bleeding everywhere. The other two were slowing down slowly, so I used it to my advantage and kicked the head enforcing, sending him flying before wrapping my jaws around the beta and squeezing until he stopped moving and fell unconscious. I growled angrily at the third who came limping back, and raised my hackles, daring him to challenge me again. He bowed out and he shifted along with the other man. The beta remained unconscious. Ace handed me his shirt as I shifted and I slipped it on, avoiding his gaze as I glared at the men who'd attacked me. What was the meaning of that? I could have you hung, drawn and quartered, exiled or whipped. Care to explain? The third nodded and smiled as he was seized by two members of my pack who looked pissed they'd attacked me. That was a test. One you passed with flying colors, Alpha Knight. He bowed his head and kept his gaze on the ground as the men of his pack fell to the ground on their knees. Heads bowed. I narrowed my eyes on him and looked at Matthias, who smiled. He speaks the truth. It is customary for their pack to test the new alpha, see if he or she in your case is strong enough to lead them. Get up. Get settled. I ordered the third, as two men picked up the beta and took him to the infirmary. He nodded and stood, grabbing his bags and walking into the house. The remainder of his pack mates stayed kneeling and I walked closer to them. Do any of you have mates, mated or otherwise? There was silence for a few minutes before one man shook his head. Many of us do not. Only 10 of us are mated. I nodded and looked over the men. You may all stand. Those of you who are mated, bring your mates forward so that you are assigned a room together. 20 men and women walked up to where I pointed to Yanni's, and I looked at the remaining 60 men. If you find your mates here, come to me or my betas and we'll make sure to arrange a room for both of you. For the meantime, please don't start too many fights. I'm sorry, I threatened Hansel. I told Ace begrudgingly, who sat on the couch next to me. I realized that he was my friend, and I needed people I could trust surrounding me. I couldn't keep pushing them away. It was a low blow. He agreed, looking out the window. I was thinking about what you asked though, and I have an idea as to where Klaus is. He held up his hand as I sat forward and shook his hand. He'll be here when the time is right. Just trust him this once. When he gets here, you can fight to your heart's content. But going after him would only make the situation worse. I sighed and nodded. Go spend time with Gretel. Things have been hectic around here and everyone deserves a break, I ordered. He smiled and stood, squeezing my knee. Take your own advice, Jen. Let loose for once and relax. Have a bit of fun. I nodded, pursing my lips as he left. I could heard laughing from outside, so I went to the window and a small smile slipped onto my face when I saw the pack kids and teenagers all playing in the giant pool outside. I had an idea and bounded down the steps towards the kitchen, where some of the older women, previously from different packs, were baking and bonding. Alpha! They all greeted me with smiles on their faces. I smiled back at them and took one of the cookies on the rake. Wow, these taste amazing, ladies, I said after a bite. You wouldn't consider making more for the pack barbecue I'm hoping to have tonight, would you? I asked. They all nodded happily and resumed baking. I popped into the pantry to make sure that there was enough food for tonight, and I made a mental note to order more food so that I didn't have a riot of hungry wolves on my hands. I'll ask some more pack members to help cook everything up, I told the ladies in the kitchen before leaving. I walked around the pack house for a bit, spreading the word of the pack barbecue and asking for volunteers to help cook everything. Many of the new pack members were more than happy to help, so I went upstairs and got changed into my bikini, opting for a day at the pool. I scribbled a note for myself. A reminder to order more food and essential household items for the pack. Hey Alpha! I nodded to the boys a few years younger than myself and snagged a lounger near the pool. I pushed my sunglasses onto my face and closed my eyes, resting against the lounger. I felt some of the wolves staring at me and a small grin slipped onto my face. They were too inquisitive. I grabbed the chubby hand of a toddler before they could poke my eye out, and opened my eyes to peer down at the little boy. What are you doing, little one? I asked, pulling him onto my lap as he stared at me. You de Alpha? He asked, touching the scars on my side. He could have been only 2 or 3 years old and was cute as a button. I nodded and laughed at his odd face. You purty. Michael, a girl around my frantically called as the little boy on my lap stilled. Her gaze landed on him and she paled as she realized he was sitting on my lap. Alpha, I am so sorry, she said, rushing up to me and scooping out of my arms. I chuckled and shook my head. It's fine. He was just being inquisitive, I told her, lying back on the lounger. She gave me a timid smile and nodded, before scuttling off with what I think was her brother. You bitch! I heard someone yell behind me, sounding very familiar. You didn't even call! I turned to see Davy barreling towards me with Keegan in swim trunks. I stood as she pounced on me, hugging me tightly. God, Jen. I'm so sorry about your dad. I nodded and stepped back, swallowing the lump in my throat. He's with his mate and brother now. She nodded, but I knew that she didn't believe I was okay, because I wasn't. Come on. Let's check out that gym you had built, she said, leaving Keegan to join a few of the guys playing volleyball. Sweat dripped down my back as I kicked the stuffing out of one of the man-punching bags. I hated that Davy had bought up my dad, something I'd managed to push out of my head the last few months. Her condolences, coupled with my mother's ladder, had put me on edge and I just wanted to kill something. After tonight I would have all pack members swear their loyalty to me, fully merge the packs and then begin taking down the hunters and searching for this elusive Fugo. The chain snapped the bag fell to the floor as I landed another punch and I growled in frustration. That was the third I'd broken. Jen, calm down. You're meant to be relaxing today. Hansel laid a hand on my shoulder but I shrugged it off, taking a deep breath in through my nose and out through my mouth. I am relaxing, I said tensely. A total contradiction. No, you're not. You're breaking punching bags and scaring the new wolves, he said, pointing to the door where a large group had gathered, all of whom scampered away when they saw I was glaring at them. What's up with you? I huffed and sat down on a nearby stool. Nothing, I'm fine. Hansel sat down in front of me and looked me in the eyes. You're not fine and I know it. Tell me the truth, Jen. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to let it all out. Cry, scream, shout. But I didn't. I couldn't. Trust me, I said, swallowing back tears as I gave him a tight smile. Everything's fine. I'm just tired. Hansel stood and patted me on the back. You can always tell me anything, Jen. I nodded and stood, standing on front of the next bag. Yeah, I'll do that. Who's up for a race over the mountains? I asked the huge group of men who were all playing a game of soccer. There were shouts of agreement and taunts as I stripped off my clothes and shifted as my pack followed, howling to the sky as we ran. My legs burnt as I raced ahead of the group by miles. I was like a shadow in the undergrowth, running so fast that colors blurred together. It felt like I was flying. I loved running and I loved having such a big territory and area to run in. It meant I had no boundaries. 1 minute I was running and then next a stinging pain hit my side. I tumbled over and looked around to see a big dart sticking out of my side. Out of the trees strolled scores of men, all armed with guns that were all aimed at me. I stood, growling at them as my vision blurred slightly and my paws felt heavy. Whatever they'd shot me full of was quickly working its way into my system. I lunged at the nearest group of hunters and tore into them as their comrades shot at me. The man's head hit the floor with a dull thud as another shot, and caught me in my shoulder, and another in my thigh. I staggered back as they kept firing, and I felt my body shut down. I fell to the ground, dizzy and whined as everything blurred together. Wavke up, bitch! A bucket of ice-cold water was dumped over my head and I growled at the man above the tiny cage I was in. It only offered maybe 3 feet of moving space as a wolf between my body and the silver bars. My head pounded and I snarled at them, still a wolf, as men sneered at me from above in a viewing deck. I growled and bared my teeth and tried to stand, but my head hit the bars and I swallowed a whimper. Silver burns werewolves badly. So dis is de notorious Jenna Knight, Rory Tannen's daughter, traitorous bitch zat she vas. A man rasped in a heavy Russian accent as he stood at the front of the crowd. He had graying hair that was slicked back. Beady black eyes sat under thick bushy eyebrows. He wore a crisp gray suit that accentuated his hair, and on his fat little fingers were numerous rings. He sneered at me and spat into the cage. Got rid of my beaviness partner, he said, rolling his R's. I growled, desperately wanting to get out of this cage and kill them all. I wanted to see their blood splashed across the floor, their hearts ripped out and bodies scattered. Now. There'll be time for that laters. He nodded to one of the men next to him who begun turning a heavy wheel. The door at the front of my cage slowly creaked open. They were letting me go? No, they wouldn't go to the trouble of catching me just to let me go. That didn't make sense. Ye will fight, the man ordered as the roar of a massive crowd reached my ears. The cage continued in a kind of hallway which hunters herded me down like a cow for slaughter, with silver rods that pierced my fur when I didn't move. Bright lights blinded me as I walked into a large dusty arena, raised stands surrounding every side like a stadium. The sound was deafening as people booed at me and yelled insults. I growled as another wolf was pushed into the arena, a huge male, though he was thin and mangy with a wild look in his one remaining eye. Once the gate shut behind him with a definitely bang, he wasted no time in attacking. I dodged as the reality of the situation set in. I was in a fight ring. Not only were these rings illegal in the human world, but also illegal in the supernatural world, and only hunters dared disobey as it usually ended with a lot of wolves dying. I growled when he tried to bite my side and swiped my paw at his head, claws scraping his neck when he twisted his head out of the way. This was sick. I could see that in his eye, he didn't want to fight me, but the thought of what the hunters would do to him drove him on. I pounced on top of him and tore his head from his body quickly, ending it, the only way to let him escape. In the last few months, I'd had reports of these kind of fighting rings coming across my desk where wolves were being snatched. I growled as the hunters pushed wolf after wolf into the arena with me. Some weren't even werewolves, and I was becoming madder by the second. When they pushed the 10th wolf in, I couldn't handle it anymore. He was big. As big as Ace, but he was covered in cuts. Fur was ripped off him in tufts. He limped severely, and where his right eye should have been, was a bloody, mangled mess. I knew that he would have been a great warrior from the way he carried himself, and I was enraged that they had done that to such a proud, mighty wolf. Instead of attacking me, he slowly approached and bowed before me, licking my blood-stained snout with a whine only I would be able to hear. I stood over him and looked at the people bowing at us with absolute hate, and I vowed in that moment, I would kill every single one of them. I would track them all down, and I would make their deaths slow and painful. It would be worse for the ones who ran these games. They'd regret the day they were ever born. The gates opened and a huge gray wolf strolled in like he owned the place. This one was different from the others. He were huge, bigger than even the wolf under me, and unlike the rest, was muscled and well-fed. I growled at him as he began circling us, and I felt absolute disgust as the man, the man, under me whined. This wolf was obviously a favorite of the hunters, and got fed in exchange for being their bitch. He approached me and snapped at the wolf lying under my legs, so I wrapped my jaws around his snout and shook my head from side to side. I'd break his fucking mouth if he tried anything again. He glared at me and swiped me with one of his paws, claws fully extended. He caught me on my side before I could twist away, and his claws sunk into my fur like it was butter. Pain hit me full force as he ripped his claws down my body and I pulled away, jumping on his back and clawing his sides as I tried to get a good grip on his meaty neck. But he was an experienced fighter and bucked me off swiftly. This continued for what felt like hours, each of us wounding each other with our claws and teeth, but neither of us got the upper hand. I noticed that he had been trying to push me away from the wolf that had collapsed in the corner, and I wasn't going to give him an inch of room to herd me away from him. Something in the air changed and the wolf lost his footing for 1 millisecond, and it was all I needed. I tore out his throat and watched in satisfaction as his dead body fell to the ground motionless. Movement from where the wolf lay caught my eye, and I watched in horror as the wolf tried to stagger to his feet when a loud bang went off and he hit the floor, blood leaking from his chest. I watched as he drew a shaky breath, his pain-filled brown eyes watching me. Blood gushed from his chest, and I watched as the life in his eyes was snuffed out. Yet another person I'd failed. Hunters swarmed the arena as the lights dimmed. I watched them with a murderous glare and killed 7 before the first dart hit. They would pay. Each and every one of them would pay their dues in blood, and I would be there to make sure it was more painful than they could ever imagine. And I don't even know how I survive. No, I don't even know if I'm alive. I have no idea how long I'd been in this hellhole. But I knew that I needed to get out soon. Antonov, as I had found out was his name, had been running out of punishments every time I refused to fight or disobeyed, and not only was he running out of new ways to hurt me, but he was also losing control of the other wolves the longer I was here. Scars littered my body from the silver they used on me regularly, but lately I had noticed that the effects of silver had begun to fade. I was becoming more tolerant of the damned stuff. Occasionally I caught chatter through the pack link, but I wasn't immune to the silver enough to communicate with them. I had become thin though. So thin that bones poked out of my skin, and I knew that I would probably look like death warmed over. The only way I'd been able to survive was because of the single guard who snuck me food when he could. He hated the hunters as much as I did for some reason. The cranking of gears snapped me out of my thoughts, and my tail twitched in annoyance. That's all this situation was to me now. An annoyance. I could hear the faint buzz of the electric prongs they used to herd us out of the cages, and I growled when they stick the prong into my cage. I snapped at him and sidestepped the stick. After all, it only reached so far. Soon enough my cage was surrounded by hunters with electronic prongs, and I was forced to move forward into the arena, or face being burnt to a crisp from the inside out. I'd already been electrocuted 5 times, and each time was enough to make me black out. I growled and bared my teeth at the nearest hunter and charged him, snapping my teeth and stopping just before the bars and cattle prod. He jolted back, his face white with terror, and I smirked at him. A truly terrifying thing is a wolf. "Get her into the ring!" Antonov yelled as they poked me with the prongs. Voltage turned down. It hurt though, boy did it hurt. Eventually they got me into the ring, probably with many scorch marks marring my coat. The moment the gates shut, the crowd fell silent, and I knew that I was meant to die today. Too bad I wouldn't. Not today. I walked around the ring with my head held high, eyeing the people above like the vermin they were. After all, they'd come to watch innocent wolves die, and I wouldn't ever condone that. The gates around the arena, under the raised seats, slowly opened with a groan. Slowly, one by one, 4 huge wolves prowled out, eyeing me like a juicy piece of meat. They were all bigger than me and much better fed. Each was built like a tank, and I knew I was in for the fight of my life. They took their time, circling me, watching me, assessing me. All my senses were strained, and I stood ready to pounce in the center of the circle, watching as they circled me with furious blue eyes. I challenged them, daring them to make their move, for it would end in their demise, that I was sure of. I watched as the muscles of the wolf in front of me tensed, and I ducked just as a giant body flew over my head, snapping its jaws where my head had just been. I sidestepped the next wolf and ducked under the third, moving out of the fray. These wolves were obviously driven by the thought of blood, so focused on it that they would do anything to get it. They were mad, and it could be the one thing that saved me. As they fought between themselves for a second, I took the chance and jumped on the back of the nearest one, wrapping my jaws around his neck. This put me at a disadvantage though, as my body was unbalanced, and he used that against me, bucking me off him and into the fray of claws and teeth. They ripped into me like I was made of paper. In retaliation, I kicked out at the one going for my side, raking my claws down his face. I showed no mercy as I lunged at the biggest one and chewed into his thick neck. He thrashed, trying to dislodge me, but it only made it worse for him. I fended off attacks by kicking out while I literally chewed his head off. When his body fell limp to the floor, I spat the flesh out of my mouth and turned to the next one, ignoring my injuries. They would use any sign of injury or weakness against me. That's how wolves hunted. The remaining 3 tried to work together as a pack, but they weren't together. They didn't move as one, and it wasn't to their advantage. They used sheer force instead of cunning. They were trying to injure me until I couldn't run, or got too tired, and slowly but surely it was working. When the next wolf came at me, I threw him back and he hit one of his friends. They both went flying, smashing into the silver bars. A definite crack resounded, and the smaller wolf slumped to the floor, dead, its head at an odd angle. I bolted for the wolf who'd I'd thrown and latched onto his hind leg, bringing him down to the ground again. Before he could retaliate, I ripped out his throat. I could feel the glare of the last wolf, and I turned around slowly. We stared at each other, sizing up our opponent. He was one of the biggest, with thick sooty fur, smudges of gray and brown through his coat with dull blue eyes. I felt my legs shake from exhaustion and starvation, so I made the first move before my legs could give up. We were a blur of fur, teeth and claws, a jumble of snarling, growling and snapping as we fought. It soon became a game of cat and mouse, and I could tell that he was quickly getting sick of it. As I dodged him this time, I spun and jumped onto his back, clawing his flank and biting his scruff. He threw me off into the dust, and I felt a snap and intense pain from my ribcage. I hissed and snapped at the male who was so intent on killing me. Don't shift, don't shift, don't shift. I doubt the people above knew that we were werewolves, and if they did, I doubt they'd care, but I didn't want to be the one responsible for bringing a shitstorm of more hunters. Because they, just like all those other narrow-minded people, would kill my kind for being different. The wolf circled me as I tried to get up, but I just felt so tired, so cold, so much pain. My body slumped backwards to the ground as he approached, standing over me with a victorious glint in his eyes. Not today. Mustering all my energy, I raised my head up and latched onto his throat. Blood gushed out of his neck, and his heavy body slumped on top of me, moving my broken ribs around more. I held in a whine as his blood rushed over my body, soaking my thinning coat with the crimson gore. Black spots covered my eyes, and I think I passed out because the next thing I remember was someone pushing the dead wolf off me. I opened my eyes and a strangled gasp left me when I saw hundreds of wolves behind the bars of the arena, watching me with respect and admiration. Werewolves. I was dragged into the middle of the dust arena, where they wrapped chains around my beaten body, chaining me to the floor and landing a few kicks on my broken ribs, and that was all it took for me to pass out. Psst. A low rumble escaped my lips as my eyes fluttered open, blinking from the light that assaulted my eyes. Psst. Alpha Knight. I tilted my head to the side to see Cole and a male I'd never seen before. They approached slowly, and I watched them with distrust. They slowly took the chains off me, and I nearly sighed in relief when the silver stopped burning me. The strange man looked down at my side and then at my face. May I? I searched his eyes for any sign of treachery. I nodded. I really had nothing left to lose. He rebroke and aligned my ribs as I whined in pain, but afterwards it felt better. Once the pain began wearing off, Cole laid out a pair of gray sweatpants and a muscle shirt for me, and so for the first time in months I shifted back to a woman. I'd stayed wolf to avoid the roaming eyes of wolves and hunters alike. My hair had grown another 5 inches and was a mangled, bloody mess. My frame was thin and I looked like an anorexic stick. My skin was pale and I knew that I would have dark bags under my eyes. I stood and slid on the clothes before cracking all my joints. I loved being wolf, but not for that long and not in these conditions. It's inhuman to lock up such beautiful wild beasts. And that's exactly what the hunters had done. Antonov's taken most of the men out to search for new fighters, and there's only a skeleton crew left. This is your chance to escape, Cole said as he turned around with the man. Doctor, I assume, who'd fixed my ribs. Cole passed me water and food and I wolfed it down. It tasted so good, and I was only a protein bar. There's a car parked right outside the entrance with a map and keys. You can get away, but you have to take me with you. I shook my head and handed him the canister back. I'm not leaving yet. How many other wolves are being held prisoner? His eyes widened in shock as he registered my words. 300 werewolves and 100 wild wolves. What are you going to do? Make them pay, I muttered. Those who want to leave may, but those who stay and fight the men who have stripped you of your freedom, taken your pride and beaten your body, will all have a place in my pack. I told the men who stood before me. This is your chance for retribution. A chance to fight back. A chance to be free. I had let the werewolves out of their cages, and Cole had provided them with food, water and clothing before I asked for their help. While the wild wolves had been released into the Russian wilderness, only the ones who were greatly injured had stayed. I'd found out that the compound was in Russian, specifically Blagoveshchensk. 20 years ago it had been the main operating base for the hunters, led by a man named Rieker, the men who killed my mother. They'd built over the top of the rubble and now it was an illegal dogfighting ring. But not anymore. There were shouts of agreement and I watched as their eyes lit up. Many of these men had been here for only a short period of time, but the hunters had managed to put out the light in everyone's eyes through their actions. These men had been forced to kill others. Beaten. Some even experienced other forms of abuse. None of us would ever be the same. And the only thing I could do to help them was give them a place to call home, and a family to help them heal. I knew that I wouldn't be the same. I'd done things, I'd seen things. I felt like even though this hell was about to end, it would never be over. I'd relive it every night and wake up alone. I was the leader of so many people, but I'd never felt so lonely, so forsaken. I hid this all behind a tight smile as I watched them. I was worried, scared as to what was to come. There was no way to call for help either. I was alone, once again. "Who here's a good shot?" I asked, silencing the crowd. A few men put up their hands and I nodded. "Good. I want you set up around the arena with snippers. Cole, please make sure that they're set up. I need you to lure the hunters into the arena and lock all the doors. Make sure that they can't get out, and then soak the entire arena in fuel and kindling." He paled but nodded. "What are you going to do?" he asked quietly. "Burn them all." I could hear them outside. Car doors slamming, shouts of a good hunt and the stench of silver were all good indicators. I knew that they'd probably bought back some local wolves, and I knew that it could work to my advantage. Their pack would come looking for them, and if they were Rouges, it meant a few more men to help take down these bastards. I'd had bound myself back in those chains, though this time, I wasn't starving and I wasn't injured. They'd been gone for over 10 hours and by the 7th we'd been ready. The chains felt like pins and needles wherever they touched instead of the sharp burning pain I had once felt. I heard Cole talking to them before the sounds of hundreds of footsteps came my way. Everyone had protested when I'd gone back down there, but I knew that they wouldn't come into the lion's den without a good push. That good push being that I had dropped dead. I know that they would all want to see my body. The proof that they'd killed Alpha Jenna Knight. I hid a smile as I lay limp under the chains, and I knew that once they were all in, Cole would give the signal and I would have to run. Or face hundreds of armed hunters. I held my breath as I felt their gazes on my limp body, their whoops of joy as they approached. I felt someone land a kick to my side, and I ground my teeth to stop the growl. Instead, I relaxed my muscles and waited. "Now, Jenna!" I heard Cole's shout moments later and I sprung up, throwing the chains off me. The guy who'd kicked me jumped back and before he could pull out the gun on his hip, I was out of the arena and Cole had locked the door. Antonov wasn't there though, and I growled, shifting and taking the clothes that Cole passed me as the hunters tried to shoot at the wolves above. But they missed. Their weapons consisted of darts, knives and a few handguns that weren't dangerous because they weren't in range. A gunshot went off, and Cole's body slumped against the bars, sliding to the floor. I turned to see Antonov holding a gun with murder written on his face. He fired at me this time and I dodged, but the bullet still lodged into my shoulder. I charged him with a loud growl and tackled him to the ground, not before the gun went off again. I looked down in horror at the bullet hole in my chest and fell to my knees. He looked triumphant as he lowered the gun and frowned at me. "You just don't die, do you?" Damien was right. I watched as 3 wolves crept up behind him and smirked. "No, I just don't die." They jumped on him and hamstringed him. Blood gushing from his wounds. "Put him in with the others," I ordered, digging the slug out of my shoulder. I looked over to Cole where blood was now trickling out of a hole in his head. "Dead," I growled and watched as the wolves shifted and threw Antonov into the pit. The wound on my chest is still bleeding profusely, and I felt extremely dizzy. I blinked and tried to stem the blood flow, but not much was working, so I stood and slowly walked up to the viewing decks. I stood in front of the men and hunters who all stared at me in fear. On the seat behind me was a lighter and I grabbed it, flicking it on and smirking down at the hunters as my breathing became short. Pain radiated from my chest and I felt very faint. "Ransack the house. Kill anyone you find and get the plane ready." I ordered a group of 20 men. "Time to meet your maker," I rasped as I threw the lighter into the arena where a puddle of fuel lay. It exploded into flames and I watched as the hunters all grouped together to escape the flames. Make sure that this entire complex goes up in flames. Nothing left. I told a nearby wolf before I passed out. I groaned as light assaulted my eyes and I sat up, looking around. Where was I? There was a constant beeping that seemed to speed up as I looked around. Looking down at my body, I had a drip and sticky pads on my chest, along with a huge white bandage. I ripped the pads off and took out the IV. Peeking under the bandages, a thick, puckered scar marred the skin between my breasts. I hadn't felt better in weeks, though I was still very thin and had many new scars. I felt free. I recognized the room as one of the many in the packhouse infirmary and I smiled to myself. I was home. Standing, I grabbed the pile of clothes on a chair and got dressed. My stomach rumbled, and I just imagined the food that was waiting in the kitchen. How did I get here, though? I glanced at the clock on my bedside table and the bright red numbers blinked 4:59 a.m. Which explains why it was so dark outside. So, why was the light on? I tried to take a deep breath, but my chest held a twinge of pain. It smelt like vanilla and wood smoke and soil. Rouge. Who had been in here? Opening the door, I walked quietly past the curtains that separated injured people and up the stairs into the kitchen. Ripping the fridge open, I practically drooled at all the food available to me. There was a rich chocolate cake in a Tupperware container, so I grabbed a knife and cut a thick slice. You'll throw up if you eat that. I spun around, cake and knife in hand, to face the one person I never thought I'd see, never wanted to see again. My knuckles must have turned white with the tight grip I had on the knife, and I just wanted to plunge it into his body multiple times. I'm sure it would make me feel better. Klaus! I growled, my hands tightening into fists as I glared at him. There were so many reasons why I hated him, and at that moment I remembered all the times he'd forsaken me. He'd had so many opportunities to fix whatever it was between us, yet Ace just gave me some bullshit excuse about how dangerous it was for him. Bullshit. So many times I needed him, yet he never had the balls to show up, and now he was standing before me in my house, telling me what to do. Get out, I hissed. Get out of my house. Get out of my territory. Get out of my life. I yelled at him, throwing the cake at him while brandishing the knife. He stepped back with a hurt look on his face while holding his hands up in front of him. Jenna No, I screamed, dropping the knife and punching him straight in the eye. I was so hurt and humiliated by his last words to me, how he marked me and just left all those times I needed someone, him. Get out! I'm sure I must have woken the whole house with my shouting, but I didn't care. This was turning out to be such a wonderful homecoming. I could hear the pounding of footsteps as Klaus placed a hand on his cheek and looked at me shocked. If you don't get out of my sight in the next 5 seconds, I'll do more than punch you in the face, I growled, stepping closer with a clenched fist aimed at his balls. He backed away with disappointed eyes. I'm sorry, Jen, but I'm here now to fix things between us. I shook my head as tears dripped down my cheeks. Get out. Just leave. Ace and Hansel ran into the kitchen with Hunter and some of the men of the pack right on their heels. I wiped away my tears quickly and picked up the knife, laying it in the sink before turning to my pack. Hi. Hunter frowned at me and growled. Hi? That's all you can say? You disappear to God knows where, and then 3 months later, hundreds of Rows show up in a plane with our dying Alpha, and all you can say is, hi? I felt my heart sink. 3 months. Where are the Rouges now? I calmly asked. Though inside I was panicking. We locked them up because we didn't know if they were telling the truth. Something about a fighting ring and hunters, he said angrily. Right. Hunter, can you please organize rooms for them? He pursed his lips but nodded as Davy came bolting into the room. She stopped dead, looking at me in shock before tears poured out of her eyes, and she tackled me in a tight hug. Oh God, I thought you were dead. There was so much blood and you weren't waking up. What did they do to you? I bit my lip and swallowed my tears. I'm here, alive and well. I definitely don't feel well, but I didn't want Davy to know that. I'm tired. I'll see you in the morning. Please make sure that those rooms are ready. I yawned. I wasn't tired. I was exhausted, drained both mentally and physically. With the last remnants of energy I had left, I darted up the stairs to my room and fell into my bed before burying my face in my pillow as sobs racked my body. And I could have sworn as I drifted off that arms wrapped around my waist and the scent of vanilla wood smoke lulled me away. Put your best face on for the world, fake another smile and just pretend, but you're just putting off the pain. What the hell? I yelled as I opened my eyes to come face to face with one very toned, tanned chest. I pushed him off the bed, escaping his grip before he could pull me down with him. What the hell, Klaus? A low growl escaped his lips as he watched me with unfocused, sleepy eyes. What are you doing? Go back to sleep, Jen. He crawled back into the bed and lay half on top of me, wrapping his arms around my waist, his breath tickling my neck. I hissed at the pleasant sensations it brought and pushed him off me, though he only hovered above. Klaus, I told you to get out of my territory, so why are you still here? I demanded, pushing him onto his back so I could get up. And why the hell are you in my bedroom? In my bed. What the hell was wrong with him? He keeps his distance for months after saying that he doesn't want me and then almost a year later reappears and decided to become all caring. No, that's not how it would work. Walking into my closet, I pulled out a pair of jeans and a blue checked shirt. Both hung off my thin frame and I frowned down at myself. I had always liked my curvy, muscled figure and now I was unhealthily thin. Get out of my room and find one of your own if you're not going to leave, I told Klaus before leaving. I couldn't be in the same room as him without wanting to punch him in the face or burst into tears. Now I had to repay the wolves who helped me escape though, something to distract me from him. I'm sorry you guys were locked down there, I said as the wolves who'd brought me home filed out of the underground prison. Breakfast is being served, and there is a room for each of you. That is if you chose to join and are down with a female alpha. There had been a few families who'd left because they didn't agree with the fact that I was a girl, but I didn't care. I didn't need people like that in my pack, and the wolves who had stayed were all fine with me. A few guys looked like they chalked on their spit, and I held back a laugh at their expressions. Seriously? You think we'd have a problem with you? Alpha Night, without you we wouldn't have escaped the hunters. You gave us the courage to rebel. All of them nodded and I was touched. I hadn't thought I would be an inspiration to anyone. Ever. I was rash. I had a temper and little tolerance of people who wasted my time and talked behind me back. I was violent, foul-mouthed and bossy, yet they looked up to me. For those who may have family or friends, you can call them and I will fly them over. If you had a previous pack and wish to return, then I will not stop you and I will pay for your flights. I'll have some of your new pack mates show you where your rooms will be and the general layout of the house. However, I said, holding up my hand before they got too excited, if any of you cause problems then I will not hesitate to kick you out of my territory. Those who are leaving, please follow me. I nodded to Hunter, who stood off to the side with 20 men and women who'd offered to show the new wolves around. As I walked to my downstairs office with the wolves who wanted to go home, my chest twinged and I rubbed a hand over the healing wound. I don't doubt that it would trouble me for years to come. Please write down the name of your previous alpha, name, family and divided by or friends, position in your old pack and the date that you disappeared. I listed off as I sat behind the new desk. I had this second office built for the purpose of meeting with wolves from other packs, etc., because I don't want them in my apartment. My room had always been my sanctuary and no matter what, only people I trusted were allowed in. That's why I got so angry at Klaus this morning. The 11 men all wrote down what I requested and I thanked them before they left for their rooms because there was no way I could sort all of them out today. What happened when you disappeared? Where were you? I ignored Hunter, Hansel, and Ace as they burst into my office and kept flicking through my father's old diary to find the numbers of the alphas I needed. After all, they had to be in here somewhere. You can't just ignore us forever. You'll have to tell me sometime, Hunter said, sitting down while Ace and Hansel just watched me. Looking up from the book, I schooled my features so I didn't look murderous, because that's how I felt. You have no right to demand anything of me. After all, none of you did anything to find me now, did you? I asked sarcastically, before pointing to the door. Get out! Hunter shook his head angrily while Ace and Hansel left, seeing a fight brewing on the horizon. No, you can't say that we didn't look for you, because that's a lie. You disappeared and we smelt hunters, lots of them. We called in one of the best trackers but the trail ran cold. We searched for months and then you just turn up out of the blue with hundreds of rouges, bleeding while your lungs filled with blood? I have never been so scared in my life. I saw tears in Hunter's eyes as he yelled at me. You nearly died, and all I saw was your mother, as you lay cold and unmoving on that bed. When Klaus came with his pack, I figured out quickly that he was your mate, so we put him in your room, and the color returned to your skin. You began healing quicker. I growled and flicked through another page angrily. That bastard had no right coming here or even trying the things he had. What was his deal? In fact, the tracker we hired is still here, Hunter said. Perhaps you'd like to ask him to join the pack? So, he's a rouge wolf? I focused back on my dad's messy writing and struck gold when various phone numbers were listed beside pack names. The private phone numbers of the alphas. I looked up to see Hunter scratching his head and shuffling around a bit. Out with it, Hunter. He's not a wolf. He's a bear. I looked at him like he was crazy. A bear. It's not surprising that he's a tracker, as bears have noses over 1,000 times more sensitive than that of a bloodhound's. But bears are solitary creatures by nature, and this was a wolf pack, with the exception of Davy, who was a cat. Why would he want to join a wolf pack? I asked, confused. Hunter shrugged and pursed his lips. It'd be a nice gesture, even if he doesn't accept. He's a really good guy, Jen, and he'd be a great addition to the pack, or a good friend to have. Fine. I huffed. Now get out. I need to call some people. At least I avoided more questioning. I didn't want anyone to know where I'd been, what they'd done to me, or what I'd done. When he left, I began working through the list before me, calling all the old alphas to make sure that they were ready for their returning pack members. Some men came from the same pack, but many were scattered right around the world. The last man on my list was the one I least wanted to talk to. I tensely listened as the dial tone rang, and fiddled with the corner of my desk. Miller speaking. Who's this? I swallowed the lump in my throat at hearing his voice. Night. Jen? I thought you disappeared. We got the call from Hunter a few months ago. Where were you? What happened? He fired off the questions and I brushed them aside, looking down at the name on my paper. That's not important. But did you ever have a man by the name of Alfred Romero in your pack? He sucked in a breath and I could practically feel the sadness. Yes, he was the son of a good friend of mine and he disappeared just over 5 years ago now. Why? I felt a smile creep onto my face. I found him. That's why I'm calling. He wants to come home. I heard him suck in a breath. I'll be there tomorrow. He hung up before I could answer, but that was all right. I could tell how shocked and happy he was. Since my pack had 2 huge jumbo jets and a few smaller planes, the men going home didn't need to book tickets, and all I'd have to do was hire a pilot. Everything was falling into place. I only had a giant pile of paperwork to see to, and had to hold another pack barbecue to welcome the new men who were probably locked up in their rooms. I know I would. I was engulfed in a huge by Miller before the cars even stopped. I'm so glad you're all right. Everyone was so worried, he said after stepping back to look me over. I chuckled and nodded. I was far from all right. Nightmares haunted me every night, and I hardly got any sleep. It resulted in one very temperamental, snappy alpha, and everyone now avoided me. I lead him and the wolves he'd bought into the house, and showed them their rooms. I could tell that they were almost bursting to see Fred, but they'd see him at the barbecue tonight. I'd managed to pull it together in one night, and I had organized just under 300 rooms for the new wolves. I now had nearly 1,000 wolves in my pack, and already I knew that I would have to add extensions onto this house to allow for population growth. I'd deal with that tomorrow though. Tonight was a time for celebration. I didn't feel very celebratory though. I'd try at least for the pack. I had 4 hours before the barbecue, which meant that I had time to hit the gym, unwind a little and sweat out my worries before socializing. I needed to rebuild my muscles and my fitness level because when the bullet had torn through my lung, it had done a lot of damage. I dressed in leggings that covered my legs right down to my ankles, and a black shirt. On my arms sat many scars, both long and thin or small and thick. They were disgusting. I had no problems with the scars. I had gotten training and fighting to protect my pack, but the new scars? They were a constant reminder that I could run from what happened, push it out of my mind, but that it would always be there. I punched the stuffing out of a few bags before my chest began aching, so I switched to weighted squats and an array of weighted machines I'd installed. By the end, I was dripping sweat and felt better, though fatigue was heavy in my bones. "Jen, the barbecue's about to start," Hansel said, bursting through the gym door. "You need to get ready." I watched him with suspicious eyes, making him shift around nervously, but nodded. He was hiding something and I would figure it out, but right now I did need a shower. "And wear something nice, a dress," he shouted after me. I bit my lip as my eyes ran over my body, clad in a long-sleeved, long-legged jumpsuit that cinched tight at the waist. It was sexy, and highlighted my figure but hid all of my scars. I knew that many of the men would see them if I had to shift, but that I could avoid for a while, hopefully. My black hair was in loose curls down my back and had regained its silky texture with all the food I'd been eating, though it still wasn't as much as I should. My bright blue eyes were done up with a dark smoky eye, and I wore black pumps. Outside I looked fine, but inside I just wanted to crawl up in my bed and cry, or preferably, hug my dad. I couldn't do either though. "Jen, it's time." Hunter's voice drifted to my ears, and I forced a tight smile on my face before opening the door. "Ready." Hunter looked me up and down before smiling. "You look good, Jen." I dipped my head and together we walked down the stairs to an oddly quiet house. Maybe everyone was outside? Once my foot hit the bottom step, I looked up to see the entire pack crowded through the house while spilling outside. "Happy 19th birthday, Alpha." I stood still as a statue in shock. Today was my birthday? A whole year had passed since I had shifted, ran away and met Klaus? It seemed like years ago looking back on it now. My life had been so hectic. I was swept up in the crowd and I tried to be happy. I really did, but I couldn't bring myself to give a genuine smile. I tried to think of the positive as I talked to the pack, but I just couldn't. So many bad things had happened this past year, and it was hard not to break down and cry. I missed my dad more than anything. I wish Klaus hadn't left, and I regret the day I ever went out running and ended up with the hunters. But I couldn't change it, and right now all I wanted was to forget. I never would though. Today was the first day I would be back training with the 600 men of my pack and Davy. Ivan would be training the more advanced warriors while each member of Klaus's pack would take just under 100 men. It had been 3 weeks since my surprise birthday party, and after that night things had quietened down, save for the constant questions. I dragged my tired body out of bed and splashed ice-cold water on my face in an effort to wake me up. Not that I'd gotten any actual sleep. I developed insomnia and was terrified of sleeping. It was like every time I fell asleep, I was trapped in my mind, where I relived the horrors of those months with the hunters. Sleep was my own personal hell, but hey, at least I hardly had any paperwork and I was fitter than ever due to spending my nights in the gym or in my office. I knew that soon I would crash and burn. Though I couldn't help the sense of foreboding that came over me when I looked out my window, over the tops of the trees to the training ground where many men had already gathered. I knew that I'd have to shift today, something that I was absolutely dreading. But as Alpha, I had to be there. I had come to despise this position, and sometimes I honestly felt like I should have just given the pack to Will or Miller and disappeared. Sometimes I still considered it. They say it gets better over time, but it really hadn't. Nothing. Not the pain of my father's death. Not the shame of Klaus's rejection. Not the terror that the hunters had instilled in me. Then again, the people who say that are fickle-minded idiots with no notion of how scarred some people are. I slipped on a pair of ankle-length leggings and a tight, long-sleeved top, making sure that everything was covered, and ran my fingers through my hair. Staring at my raged appearance, it looked like I was still with the hunters. And I guess that in my mind I was. It was quiet in the house, and I knew that I was late, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I slowly descended the steps, staring numbly at the many pictures that lined the walls. Pictures of families, of the pack barbecues, of Matthias, Marty and Hansel. There was one that stood out. A large picture of Dad with a beautiful little raven-haired, blue-eyed little girl. Me. I was still a baby and he held me like I was the most fragile thing in the world. He looked at me with so much love, pride and joy in his eyes that it almost brought me to my knees. I really did miss him, even if he wasn't fully there for the last years. I really did love him. That was the reason why I stayed, why I fought every single day. He'd been proud of me and I knew that I could never give up the one thing he'd left, the pack. "Hey Jen, are you coming?" Keegan asked as he walked in. "Yeah," I said, clearing my throat and walking out one of the many doors, towards the training grounds. The sun hit my face and warmed my body as I stepped outside and breathed the fresh air, but did nothing for my heart. We walked together in silence and I approached Ivan while Keegan went to Hugo, one of Klaus's pack members. "Alpha Knight," Ivan said loudly before slapping my back. "Good to see you. Are you joining us today?" I nodded and gave him a tight smile. "Good. We're about to start the warm-up, a 15-mile run, on 2 legs, and then a circuit before we get into any fighting." I felt like I was dying by the time I finished. Though I was still in front of everyone else. My lungs screamed at me. 30 seconds later, Klaus burst into the grassy field with Ace and Max hot on his tail. Once the last wolf was back, we did circuit training, which includes push-ups, sit-ups, planks and burpees. Basically body weight strength training, though it was expected that you would also spend time working out in the gym, on top of self-defense training. It was all pretty intense and worked on keeping my mind off everything. I was in so much pain as we finished the circuits, but I didn't make a sound. The only indication that I was struggling was my ragged breathing due to the bullet wound. Since it was silver and had torn up my lung, it still hurt when I did strenuous exercise, like a 15-mile race for example. Ivan approached and handed me a bottle of water, which I took with a quiet "thank you." I watched the men pair up as I gulped the cold water and rubbed the bullet wound. When sparring, I have them each pair up. The champion moves to the next round and versus another winner. Eventually we get 2 who fight, and the one who wins it the victor, and is excused from warm-ups next session, he explained. I hadn't actually trained with the men. I'd trained separately for the alpha competition before I became swamped with paperwork, and then I was taken. "Jump in when you want, or you can just watch. I'm sure that the boys would be relieved." He chuckled, patting me on the back again. I nodded and stepped away slightly so he wasn't touching me anymore. Don't get me wrong, Ivan's like family, but I just couldn't handle physical contact right now. I watched from the sidelines as the men sparred, and after watching a few matches I decided to join in. I walked away from the main group and hid in a thick clump of bushes before stripping down quickly, hiding my clothes, and then shifting before there was a chance that anyone could see me. My fur, much like my hair, was shinier and healthier, but I knew that there would be patches where my major scars could be seen. First, I sparred with a younger wolf who was less experienced. His footwork was sloppy, and I was able to pin him quickly. As I worked my way up, no one was able to pin me, and the matches were over within a few minutes. The duels were till submission and serious injuries are prohibited. Only scratching and nipping, no broken bones, large amounts of blood or chunks of fur missing. Ace looked a little scared when I stood in front of him, ready to spar. Before he could move, I jumped on his back and used my momentum to force him to the ground, wrapping my jaws around his throat before he could move. He submitted by licking under my chin, and so I got off him. All these wolves were too easy to beat. Maybe it was because they weren't fighting to the death, or fighting to survive another beating. Many of the fights went this way until I was the only one standing. I looked around for the man I was meant to beat, and my eyes landed on a giant black wolf with beautiful green eyes. He took a step towards me, and I growled to myself. Guess I was versing Klaus. First to submit, no killing each other or broken bones, Ivan said, knowing full well that I did not like this man. Many didn't know that he was my mate. Those who did really hated him though. Honestly, I don't know why he stayed. He knew that he was less than welcomed. We circled each other as the men surrounded us in a makeshift ring. I watched Klaus for any form of weakness, but when I could find any I growled lowly, watching as his smoky green eyes stared at me like I was a juicy steak. He approached me and I stood still, ready to pounce as he nudged my chin with his nose. It was comical to see this giant wolf giving me puppy dog eyes, but I shook my head and growled. I wanted to fight him. He whined but backed away. He'd been trying to make nice, but I'd challenged him and he'd accepted it. He began trying to pin me, but every time I would dodge him and land a few bites or scratches on his body. Although he had a few chances to land his on me, he didn't take them and instead settled for trying to pin me. We must have been going at it for hours because the sun was high in the sky, and many of the men had slumped down to the ground. I could feel the fatigue I'd been trying to push away settle in my body, and my limbs felt like lead. I dodged another attack but fell to the ground on my back when my body began shutting down from exhaustion. The black wolf stood over me with a victorious glint in his eyes, and the wolf circled me as I tried to get up, but I just felt so tired, so cold, so much pain. My body slumped backwards to the ground as he approached, standing over me with a victorious glint in his eyes. Not today. Adrenaline rushed through me, and the black wolf only just missed my snapping jaws, aimed at his throat. A red haze fell over my vision, and all I could focus on was the black wolf trying to kill me. I latched onto the black wolf's side and tore out fur, skin, and muscle. He growled, and suddenly I was tackled to the ground, arms wrapped around me and bodies piled on top of me. I thrashed and growled, biting and scratching anyone I could, but more came. I wouldn't let them do this to me. The shouts were drowned out by the rapid beating of my heart as I thrashed, until I felt the prick of a needle in my back. My muscles all relaxed only seconds later, and slowly my skin crawled as I shifted, muscles tearing, bones breaking and reforming. I lay naked on the ground in front of all my men, all the men who were seeing what I'd worked so hard for the past few weeks to keep hidden. I curled up on my side numb and closed my eyes. I couldn't bear to see the disgust written on their faces. My whole midsection was littered with old stab wounds, and long thin scars ran in patterns, covering both my sides down to my pubic bone and under my breasts. My back was worse, much, much worse. They'd had a special whip made for me, a cat, of 9 tails with jagged hooks of silver on the ends. They'd used it often, among other things, and as a result my entire back was covered in raised, red, jagged scars from the silver hooks. It'd often rip out flesh. I heard men whisper and growl as I numbly stared at a nearby tree, trying to block what was being said. I couldn't though. I heard the cracking of bones, and then I felt hands on my back, dancing over my skin. A low moan escaped my lips at the feelings of pleasure the simple touch gave me. "What happened?" he growled, gently running his finger over the raised scars. I growled and moved away so he wasn't touching them anymore. All feelings had drained from my body and I was feeling so tired, but I wouldn't sleep. I refused to. Whatever shot they'd given me was working its way through my system, and was obviously very potent, as my body wasn't burning it up like it would other drugs. I could hear bickering in the background and I wanted to tell them to shut up, but my tongue was heavy and wouldn't form words. I'll ask again, what happened to her? It was obvious now that he was directing the question at the rouges I'd bought back from the hunter's compound, and I prayed that they didn't tell them. I didn't need their disgusted stares, and I definitely didn't want their pity. The hunter, they took her. They took all of us. They used us for their entertainment, forcing us to fight against each other, kill each other. It was disgusting. Visitors would place bets and the winner would live to see another day. If you lost but remained alive, they tortured you until you died. If you refused to fight, then they persuaded you in a very painful manner, and sometimes they beat us for the fun of it. He took a deep breath and continued with a shaky voice. It was different for the alpha. They made her suffer more than I've ever seen anyone before. I wanted to shout at him to stop, but I couldn't. My vision was fast becoming blurry and sounds were dimming. I could still hear what he was saying though. They tortured her for days if she got one hit in a fight. They developed new ways to make her hurt, and I could hear her from my cell. I blinked, trying to clear the fog that had settled over my mind. Slowly I felt the sedative wearing off, and I would kill that stupid man for telling them this. It was my business and no one else's. Oblivious to the murderous thoughts swirling through my head, the foolish wolf continued. Had he not figured out that if I hadn't told them by now, I never would? Some wolves worked for the hunters to stop the pain and for food. Antonov got angry when she kept killing his wolves, so he upped her fights and pain. I think that they were going to make sure she died before they bought more wolves in, because she was beginning to be too much for them to handle, and so they made her fight 4 of their best wolves, all as big as Klaus and meaner. She killed them all, but the last one nearly got her. The hunter let us all watch. I think it was to crush the hope that she'd given us, by crushing her. I growled and sat up as I felt myself burning up the sedative. You shut your mouth right now before I cut out your tongue, I threatened, standing on wobbly legs. All eyes snapped to me, so I stood proudly, swallowing tears at his recount of what he thought had happened. He was right, but it had been worse than he could have imagined. He shrunk back and I could taste the fear coming off him in waves. Get out of my sight. He scurried off quickly under my emotionless gaze. Jen? I turned to see Hansel with tears running down his face. Is it true? I was silent for a few minutes before I cleared my throat and nodded, yes. I looked around to see all the men staring at me with pity. No disgust or hatred. My eyes met Klaus, who stood with Hunter, and both looked ready to kill. Though Klaus looked absolutely gutted and so mad. Before my eyes he shifted and ran off into the forest, and I pushed back those few traitorous tears. Really? Jen, I am so sore. No. I cut off Hunter right before he could apologize. Don't you dare apologize, I growled before feeling very woozy. Crap. The world went black. I groaned as I sat up and rubbed my forehead, the pounding in my head increasing when I opened my eyes. Why did my head hurt? My mind flashed over the events of... Was it yesterday? Someone from my pack had shot me full of sedative to stop me from killing Klaus, and then... Oh God, they knew. I fell back against the pillows in my bed, and when I took a deep breath, I smelt vanilla and bacon. Growling, I searched the room for any sign of Klaus, and my eyes landed on a table that had been set up across from my bed. On it sat a tray filled with every kind of breakfast food imaginable. A huge padded chair was placed before the table, and I pulled it back, sitting down and staring at the food. A white piece of paper caught my attention, and I reached for it. On the front, my name was scrawled messily, though it was still readable. It was a letter, and a long one at that. Judging from the thickness of the envelope, setting it down on the side of the table, I dug into the food, even though I was itching to see what the letter was about and who it was from. I was starving. I ate until I couldn't eat anymore and then took a shower, washing all traces of yesterday from my body. I took longer in the shower than I normally would have. I was avoiding the letter even though it piqued my curiosity. Slowly I got dressed in one of Dad's old shirts and some undies before sitting in my bed, staring at the letter. Who was it from? I'd never seen that handwriting before and I was thoroughly confused. My hand shook as I reached for the letter, and ran my fingernail under the tongue, slowly pulling out 5 sheets of paper, all folded neatly and double-sided in the same black scrawl. Jenna, I know that you hate me right now, and with good reason. But I beg of you to give me just one chance. Please read this letter to the full, and if you have a change of heart, you know where to find me. I will leave you alone till then. I gritted my teeth and contemplated ripping up the letter, but curiosity kept me reading. I have no idea how to start this, so I guess the beginning would be a good idea. I was born in 1577 amperes, D in Spain, when the great comet flew over the sky. My father was a rich nobleman but human. My mother, the firstborn daughter of the Adelina Esfalerita pack. When my mother turned 18 and shifted for the first time, she was promised to the alpha of a nearby pack. Because mating bonds were often arranged when both parties had not yet found their mates, as it was very rare in those days. She'd heard things about this alpha though. He was mean and cruel, but his pack was more powerful than her father's, and if she didn't mate with him, he would wipe out her family. His name was Damien Fugo. My grandfather's pack spanned the entirety of Europe, because back then there were hundreds and thousands of wolves. Her pack was a family pack though, while Fugo's was full of hardened warriors. A day before the ceremony, my mum met my father. They were mates. Mum marked him but married Fugo and he marked her. 6 months later I was born. A human divided by wolf hybrid. Fugo was enraged when I didn't shift on my 16th birthday, finally realizing that I wasn't his child. He bit me, in an attempt to get me to shift. And it worked. I shifted. But I wasn't a normal wolf. I shifted again on my 18th birthday and I was huge. Fugo's DNA combined with my hybrid genes really screwed up my first shifts. Mum had been found out and Fugo killed her, her mate and her entire pack. I ran, knowing that he would kill me too. He's been hunting me ever since. From there things got complicated. Fugo covered his tracks and blamed me for the death of my mother's pack. My family. Because they were such a well-connected, well-loved pack, I had many people out for my blood. Fugo became power-hungry and destroyed anyone more powerful than himself, including me. It was 20 years later when I stumbled on the burning embers of what once was a house. The smell of burning flesh I will never forget. But a whimper caught my attention. Deep in the ashes, a beam had fallen on a human man who was as big as an ox. Ace. He was trapped under the burning beam after Fugo and his pack had slaughtered his family for sport and left him for dead. To save his life, I had to turn him. When he woke, he'd lost his memory. I think he suppressed the nightmare he'd witnessed that night. From that point onwards, my makeshift pack grew, gaining and losing members on the way. Over the past 4 centuries I'd had at least 50 wolves in my pack, many who I'd have to turn to save, the rest, alphas, betas and warriors from the dead packs that Fugo killed. Slowly but surely I was gaining a pack to fight against Fugo, wolves who hated him as much as I did. Every time a pack was near, we ran. I didn't want to spill more blood than necessary, and they would kill us for being rouges. You should never underestimate Fugo. I learnt that lesson well 300 years ago. I was traveling with Ace, 3 humans I'd turned, and another wolf who was born a beta. We were in Ireland, on our way to the Shifters because the beta had been good friends with the Shifter King's daughter's mate. When we entered their territory and drew closer to the castle, there were no guards to greet us. This was strange. Shifters protected their land fiercely and were most definitely to be feared. As we drew closer, the smell of burning flesh and fur, the coppery scent of blood and pure terror alerted us to the fact that something was wrong. Very, very wrong. When we finally arrived, it was a scene I will never forget in a million years. Bodies, both human and animal, were broken and torn apart, scattered across the forest and inside the castle. It was a war zone. Men, women and children lay dead on the cold stone floors inside the majestic castle. The inside was burnt where fires had ravaged only days, maybe hours before. We made our way through each room, searching for any survivors. There were none. When we made it into the king's chambers, the queen lay sprawled across the bed, violated and beaten. Her swollen belly had been sliced open and blood covered everything. Beside her was a lump of mangled flesh, a baby. She'd been pregnant and unable to shift. Fugo had slaughtered the Shifters, probably the most powerful of our races. No one ever really knows how they died. We made sure that everything was burnt to ashes. For if the truth got out, Fugo would have power. After all, fear is greater than any weapon, and there would be fear. The extinction of the Shifters motivated me to fight Fugo, fight his quest of terror. But we still had to run. Jenna, you have to understand that when you were left behind, it was for your best interests. You had a family, people who cared about you, and all of us made the decision to leave you behind, knowing that your dad was coming, and had been searching for you. I'm sorry we left, but your dad would have not only killed my pack and me for simply being rouges, but for also harboring you for weeks and marking you. Without your permission. I can't say I'm sorry I did it. I'm sorry for the circumstances and for what I said afterwards, but I never meant any of it. You bring out the best and the worst of me, it seems. Ace told me what happened while I was gone, and although I want to hunt down Huntington badly, I know that I have no right to you. I guess I should explain why I couldn't be there for you, with you. After we ran, we encountered a few problems, specifically hunters. You see, they've developed a new sedative that really knocks out wolves, and they used it on me and 2 pack members. The rest got away. I was under a hunting compound in chains when I felt your heat start. And boy, was it torture to know that you were probably with another man while I was in chains. I got out right before your heat ended, but by that time it was too late. Hunters had attacked, Alex was dead, and I'd lost my chance at being accepted as your mate. There were times I wanted to come crawling to you on my knees, but it seemed that fate, more specifically Fugo, didn't want me near you. I can't use that as an excuse though. There were times I could have come, but I was afraid. I didn't have the courage to make things right, and I blame myself for your current hate. The last straw came when you were taken. Ace hadn't been in contact for months. He was angry at me and the way I was, or wasn't handling things. I guess that I got sick of this stalemate and I finally got the balls to come back, only to find that you'd been missing for a month. I tried to find you. I really did. I used every single contact I had made over the years, and extended so many olive branches, but all clues turned up blank. When I saw those rouges carrying your limp body to the infirmary, blood everywhere, I swear that my heart stopped beating. Now that I look back, if I had known what I know now, I never would have left you. I would have stuck by your side, faced up to your dad, beaten off all other alphas, protected you from the hunters, and I never would have let you go through all this alone. Because I know what that's like. You and I are the same, Jenna, surrounded by people but so alone. But you don't have to be that way. There are so many people around you who care and love you, but you push them away. I know that your independence is important to you, and I know that you worry that if you ever did accept me, I'd suppress you and become some tyrannical alpha, taking the pack off of you. I wouldn't do that, Jen. You're more important to me than any pack, and honestly, I couldn't care less about power. We'll fight though. We're so similar that we're going to always be destined to butt heads, but no matter what, I know that if you give me a chance we can make it work. Soulmates are meant to be there for each other, and I just want you to be happy. Whether it is with or without me. Though I know which one I'd chose. I know I've been a sorry excuse of a mate, but now that I'm here though and I'm not leaving, even if you reject me. Klaus. I sniffled and wiped away the wetness on my cheeks. I could sense his hesitation at writing this, and it definitely helped me understand why he is the way he is. There was a knock on my door, so I jumped off the bed, running to the bathroom where I splashed cold water on my face to try to reduce the redness. Jen? I hid the letter under a pile of paper on my desk, and opened the door to my apartment, eyebrow raised and arms crossed over my chest. Yes? Hansel stood outside my door, looking at me unsurely. Suddenly he rushed forward, and I was engulfed in a warm hug. I'm so sorry, he muttered into my hair. I went to push him away before Klaus's words flashed through my head. So many people care and love you, but you push them away. Sighing, I wrapped my arms around Hansel and buried my face on his shoulder, breathing in his fresh scent of pine. It felt nice to be hugged. Why are you sorry? I asked as I withdrew, staring at him with a furrowed brow. He looked at the floor and dug his toe in like a little boy being scolded. Because we couldn't fight with you, we couldn't find you, and we couldn't protect you. Frowning, I closed the door and took a seat behind my desk. It's neither yours nor anyone else's fault. I got out, and I'm fine. That's the problem. You're not fine. He yelled suddenly, throwing his hands up in the air. Your dad dies. Everything's fine. You're taken by hunters, missing for months and return unconscious and half dead, but everything's fine. You melt down and almost kill Klaus, but still. Everything's fine. It seems that everything is peachy. Well, I know it's not. You don't want to lean on people. You don't want the pack to see the cracks in your life. You want to appear strong, but inside you are a scared little girl who just wants to be loved. There are people who love you, but you just don't see it past this facade you put on, he ranted. I sunk into the chair and held in tears, watching as he paced, gesturing wildly with his hands and running them through his hair. Get out, I ordered in a shaky voice as I swallowed a lump in my throat. Now. Hansel shook his head and took a step closer to me before I slammed a fist down on the table and screamed, Now, God damn it! He jumped and turned to the door. I'm not letting this go. You've pushed everyone away for this long, but not anymore. The door slammed shut behind him and I screamed, loud. Grabbing the nearest chair, I threw it across the room and stood. Running into my room, I threw on a pair of bike shorts and a training bra. At this point, I was so upset that I was angry. Angry that all these people were messing with my head and trying to mess everything up. I'd had everything figured out. I was tough, strong and undefeated. An alpha. Yet everyone around me seemed to want to tear all the walls I'd put around myself down. Slipping on a pair of runners, I strode angrily down to the pack gym, throwing open the doors where many of the men were lifting and sparring. I snarled at the ones who stared and started up one of the treadmills. I could feel their stares as I ran hard and fast, my heart pounding against my ribcage, lungs screaming in pain and my legs shaky. I ran for 2 hours, and by the end I was covered in sweat and tired. So, why didn't I feel any better? For the past week I'd been avoiding everyone. And I mean everyone. They knocked on my door and I just ordered them away, though they did leave food for me. My desk had never been so clear of paperwork, and with Christmas approaching, it was one less thing to worry about. The phone in my office down the hall began ringing, and I considered letting it go to voicemail, but last time that happened, some of my younger pack members were locked in a holding cell in Germany. With a frustrated sigh and a few choice words, I hauled myself out of bed and ran down the hall to grab the phone. On the sixth ring, Jenna Knight speaking. "This is Andrew Nightingale," came a deep voice with an accent that sounded kind of American. I knew that it was Alaskan though, that was where the royal family was based. "I'm calling to tell you that your annual pack visit is coming up, and I am bringing 50 wolves to stay 2 weeks. We'll be there tomorrow." Before I could speak, he hung up, and I growled, angrily pressing the end button. Who did he think he is? Well, apart from my king. Funny thing is that although he has the loyalty of the packs, he only has a few hundred wolves in his pack and relied on other alphas to provide men in times of war. In our monarchy, alphas are the lords. If I so chose, I could overthrow him because most of my 1,000-strong pack consisted of warriors. Even if all other packs banded together, they would probably outnumber mine 2 to 1. But even then, my pack was better trained than any other out there. If I wanted, I could take down the royal family and become queen. Lucky for them though, that I didn't want to do that. They should remember that though. Nightingale's visit would mean that I would be forced to socialize for the next few weeks. Great. "I'm sure that many of you have heard the rumors," I said, standing in front of my entire pack. When arranging the rooms, I hadn't been worried about hiding the fact that Nightingale was coming, and many people had kept stopping me to ask if it was true. So I held a pack meeting to give them all the facts instead of letting idle gossip spread crazy rumors. The room erupted in a mass of talking, and I waited a few seconds before calming everyone down. "I am here to confirm those rumors and answer any questions. Yes, King Nightingale is coming to visit. He will be here for 2 weeks, and in those 2 weeks extra patrols will be set up and other security measures will be put in place. At the end of his stay there will be a dinner hosted in his honor and everyone will be invited. Any questions?" Surprisingly, there were few questions, which I answered, and then everyone dispersed for dinner. My gaze flickered to where Klaus and his pack stood at the back with Hansel and my betas. He watched me with sadness, and I knew that I was missing a perfect opportunity to talk to him, but I just couldn't. So many things that he'd said, well written, really hit home, and right now I was so busy. Really, that wasn't a good excuse at all. I just didn't want to talk to him, or anyone for that matter. He and Hansel had unnerved me, disrupted the facade I'd been wearing, and I was pissed that they'd gotten to me. Someone grabbed my arm, and I pushed down the urge to snap their arm. Turning around, I was met by a smiling Davy. "Yes?" She held up a giant tote bag and began pulling me towards the steps. "We're having a girls' night. I've got snacks, movies, nail polish and mags." "And no," she said, holding her hand up. "You cannot say no. I don't care if you pull the big scary alpha routine. It won't work on me, and you can't order me away either because I'm a cat." I growled lowly under my breath and let her drag me up to my room. She went to my small living room and unpacked the bag on the coffee table, pulling out all my favorite snacks and a lot of chick flicks. "Come on," she said, catching sight of me just standing awkwardly next to the door. I sat down next to her stiffly as she put a disc into the DVD player and sat down next to me, making herself at home. This was beyond weird. I'd never had any friends except Hansel, and even then I'd still been a solitary child. My father's position in the pack made sure that everyone was too afraid to play with me, for fear that their big bad alpha would be mad if I got hurt. As I grew up and he became distant, I had never bothered to socialize, save for when I tried to join pack training. Now I had people trying to push their way into my life just when I had finally accepted it. Davy leant forward as the notebook started and grabbed a huge container of ice cream, pulling out 2 spoons and offering one to me. Hesitantly, I took one and she gave me a bright smile before digging in as the red sunrise flashed onto the screen. "I talked to Hansel today." Davy's voice broke through the silence as we lay on my bed, bathed in the ethereal light from the moon passing through my window. I felt her play with my long hair that was draped over the mattress, and I moved my head to look at her face. "What did he say?" She shrugged and lay down beside me, staring out the window over the treetops to a nearby lake. I asked him why you kept hiding yourself in your room and he told me what he said. Oh, that, I said quietly, looking everywhere but her. It got to you, didn't it? She asked, rolling onto her side to stare at me. After a few seconds I slowly nodded. It was right after I read Klaus's letter and both of those things combined really screwed me up, I admitted. You know it's okay to feel things. Okay not to be okay, to cry and get angry, feel sad and be vulnerable. It's okay to let people in, be loved, have friends, people who care about you. Everyone makes mistakes, but you've got to forgive. I don't know if I can. He just turns up out of the blue, obviously forgetting the fact that I needed him for months. He even admitted that he didn't come back because he didn't have the courage to make things right. Can you blame him? I mean, from what I heard, your dad was terrifying. You take after him in that. I mean, when you're mad, I would not want to get in your way. Sometimes you look like you could rip the head off anyone who didn't move out of your way quick enough. I snorted and rolled onto my stomach, reaching for the bag of chips I knew was at the end of the bed. What about you? I was sick of talking about Klaus, and honestly, I could deal with it later. What about me? Do you have a mate? Boyfriend? Friends with benefits? Crush? Davy was suddenly silent as I waited for an answer. Minutes felt like hours, and for a moment I thought that she might have fallen asleep. Jenna, I'm asexual. So you don't like anyone? At all? Ever? No. I've just never had those feelings. Never been attracted to anyone. It makes me glad I haven't found my mate. I'd probably end up rejecting him so he could move on. Hell, maybe I don't even have a mate? Sometimes I see mates and I'll admit I'm sad, I just don't feel those things. But then I see the heartbreak and fights and I think good riddance. I shrugged and pulled a light blanket over me as I closed my eyes. Sounds good to me. Though I'll admit I've enjoyed intimacy before. Nightingale will be here tomorrow. Good night. Night, Alpha. A smile crept onto my face as I felt her roll over, and then I fell into the blackness. 10 big black SUVs pulled up the long rocky driveway, leading to my pack house. The entire pack was spread out in front of the house behind me, and Davy, Hansel, Ace, Matthias, Hunter, Giannis and Marty all stood in my peripheral vision. The doors opened slowly, and out stepped the royal guards. They were all outfitted in smart casual dressy jeans, designer polos and leather boots. But I knew that their looks were deceiving. They were lethal. The middle car opened and 4 men stepped out, surveying the crowd before their gaze landed on me, standing tall and proud in front of my pack. Everyone was outfitted in their Sunday best. It wasn't every day the king visited. I could tell my pack was excited. I, however, was not. I'd made an effort though. It would be rude not to. I wore my pair of long leather pants, black singlet, fitted jacket with studded shoulders and a pair of strappy high heels. One leg appeared from the car, then a second. His Royal Highness King Andrew Nightingale took his time getting out of the car, stretching his long legs as he surveyed us all. I took a step forward and glared at the guard who stopped me, raising an eyebrow and crossing my arms across my chest. Take off your jacket, we need to see if you're hiding any weapons. I growled at his order and clenched my fists. Don't worry, Archer. If she wanted to kill me, she wouldn't need a gun. I heard Nightingale approach, but I shook my head. Oh no, Your Highness. I ground out, unzipping my jacket. Wouldn't want your dogs to think I was carrying a weapon. I slowly pulled off my jacket, showing them I wasn't hiding anything, and then I handed it to Davy. I watched with a stony expression as their eyes widened and they stared at my exposed arms and chest, littered with nasty scars. Shall we get you settled after your long flight? I asked, forcing politeness after they'd been openly gawking at my scars for a few minutes. Nightingale nodded and a few of the guys from my pack helped unload while my betas showed them where they were staying. I began walking into the house when my name was called. Jenna! I spun around to see Matthias jogging towards me. Nightingale said he wants a word. I snorted and shook my head. Well, he can bloody well find me himself. Matthias looked weary but nodded. He is the king. Maybe you should go to him? Crossing my arms, I leant against the wall. It's my territory, my pack and my house. Maybe he should show me a little respect. I won't be walked over like carpet. I'm better than that, and he needs to learn that before he begins thinking he can take my pack. He nodded with a grim expression and walked off. I'll send him to your office. I growled and ran a hand through my hair, the other on the steering wheel. Why couldn't they just shift and run? Granted, they would probably get lost or it'd take longer, but they could follow their noses. I turned up the radio and drummed to the beat as I navigated my way. Why couldn't he have sent one of his guards with one of my enforcers? I already knew the answer to that, but if I focused on it too much, I would probably crash the car in anger. Nightingale had asked me to pick up his sons purely to see if I was mated with one. He was hoping that since I have such a pure, powerful bloodline, that I would be mated to one of his sons who could then take over the pack. He'd have thousands of wolves who were loyal to him and his family. I think he also wanted me out of the house so he could talk to some of my pack members to see how I ran things, if I was a good alpha. I knew I was so he could dig all he wanted, but few people would speak bad about me. Even if they didn't particularly like me, they couldn't challenge my leadership skills. That, and they were afraid of me. After all, isn't it better to be feared rather than loved? Honestly, I just didn't know anymore. I pulled into the airstrip and turned off the car as I watched the crew unload the plane. One by one, 4 men walked out, all around 6 feet. Immediately I could tell that they were all brothers. They had similar face shapes. The tallest looked exactly like Nightingale, but the others had different colored shades of hair, and either green or blue eyes. They looked around before their gazes landed on the tinted windows of my car. All 4 began walking my way as I popped the boot for the crew to load their bags into my car. There was a tap on the window and I watched as the eldest tried to see inside. They were forced to step back as I opened the door. Their conversation reached my ears as I stepped out, and it made me want to give the one speaking a good smack. This chauffeur is terrible. Father will be hearing a boo. He caught sight of my long legs as I stretched them out and stood, focusing my glare on him. What will he be hearing? I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. He squared up to me, though I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. My father, the king, will be hearing about your terrible... Callum, stop, this is... No, Matt, don't tell me what to do. He shouted at his older brother, who watched me with panic. He knew who I was. As I said, Callum continued, directing his gaze at me, I will be telling my father about your terrible chauffeuring services. Hopefully you will be fired. I mean, you're meant to greet us like the royalty we are. Hold the door open for us and close it. He's stupid, but he's my brother, so please don't kill him, Matt said, running a hand through his hair. Callum went to open his mouth again, but Matt cut him off. Callum, shut up. Don't you know who this is? He eyed me up. An incredibly hot but incompetent chauffeur? I hid my smirk as I stepped forward and extended my hand to Matt. Alpha Jenna Knight, welcome to my land. He smiled and took my hand. Pleasure to meet you, Matthew Nightingale, at your service. Call me Matt, though. I could see him trying to mask the disappointment he felt when there were no sparks. I ignored a shocked Callum as I shook the hands of each prince before looking up at him, as he was taller than me by a few inches. If I find you talking to a member of my pack like that, I can guarantee that you won't talk much longer. You are a spoilt little brat, and I hope that you've learnt your lesson and treat people with respect, because you never know who they are. I'd kick you off my land right now if it weren't for the fact that you wouldn't last a minute without your brothers or your guards, so get in the damn car. He did as he was told, and I faced up to the remaining 3. Just because you were born into nobility doesn't mean you're going to get it easy. I don't care what your father says, you will all be participating in training. You may be princes, but you're in my territory now. Daddy's not going to step in if things get rough, so consider this boot camp a character-building exercise. If I find any of you disrespecting anyone in my house, your stay will not be fun. You will not use your titles to coerce yourselves into any female's bed unless she is willing, and you will not pick fights with any of the males. Do I make myself clear? Crystal, they all said. Great, now get in the car. They all jumped in, and I started the engine and pulled out of the lot. You said what? Davy asked as she sat in my office. Well, lay in my office, draped over the couches. I chuckled and leant back in my chair as I told her, yet again, the events that transpired in the airstrip lot. So I think that Callum pissed himself a little, and they all know not to mess with me or anyone in this pack now. Man, am I looking forward to the upcoming training sessions, she chuckled. There were 3 quick, consecutive knocks on the door and it opened to reveal a pissed-off Nightingale. He looked at Davy, who had her legs over the back of the couch and her head dangling off the edge. I'd like a word with your alpha. She stood and shot a look my way, and I nodded. As she left, Nightingale slammed the door behind him and took angry steps towards my desk where I sat relaxed. Just because you're not mates with any of my sons doesn't mean that you can disrespect them, he shouted at me. I ignored him and shuffled a few papers, but when they were ripped from my grip I slowly looked up at his face. They are your princes, and I am your king. You will look at me while I speak and you will respect my authority. I stood and grabbed my papers from him and lay them on the table. You had best calm down before I make you. You're on my land, and if anyone is being disrespected, it is me. Did Callum tell you what he said to me before I disrespectfully lay down the rules that everyone abides by when on my territory? For a second the anger dimmed, but I watched as his fists clenched again and he stepped right into my personal space. I am your king. They are your princes. You will respect us or I will order you to mate with my second-born and you won't be alpha for much longer. Now I had kept my head while he was shouting abuse at me, but now I saw red. No one threatened me. You can't make me do anything, you pompous man. I should throw you off my territory and I will if you're not careful, but I won't stop there. I pushed Nightingale out of my space. I am stronger and more powerful than you think, and if you ordered me to mate with anyone, then I would kill you, your family, your household and your pack. I would wipe out your entire bloodline and I would make you watch while I did. I backed him against a wall and leant up to his ear. My pack outnumbers yours 4-1. You'd have no help from any other pack because they wouldn't dare face me. Commands and orders won't affect me, and if you insist on trying to take my pack, the pack my father left me, the pack I fought for and the pack I protect, I will make sure that you regret the day you ever crossed me. I hissed before chuckling darkly. Because the last person who crossed me regretted it. At least I'm sure he did when I set him and all his followers on fire. I could feel him shudder before I stepped back and he just stared at me. I'll pretend that we never had this conversation, but it would be best if you remembered exactly what'll happen if you try anything. Now get out of my sight before I make good on my threat and throw you off my territory. He literally ran out of my door and I smiled to myself. At least he wouldn't mess with me again. I strode with Davy to the training field, clad in bike pants, a training bra and runners. I'd asked Ivan to focus on 2-legged fighting today, followed with some 4-legged sparring. We were late as we'd been screwing around in the kitchen, trying to make a cake for Keegan's birthday. Safe to say that it didn't go very well. I could definitely see that Davy was going to become a very good friend of mine, and I was all right with that. Ivan stood in front of my enforcers and the men that had come with Nightingale, including His Highness himself. I could only spy 3 princes, however, as I came to stand next to Ivan. Why the hell are they training? I heard one of Nightingale's guards ask. My gaze zeroed in on him and I gave him a malicious smirk. You afraid a girl kick your ass? I challenged, knowing that he'd be my first sparring partner. He smirked and shook his head as I approached. Nah, princess. I'd say that you're going down. I smiled as I heard Ivan's voice. Looks like we got ourselves our first pairing. Rules are no broken bones, no blood and no killing anyone, Jenna. I batted my eyelashes and shrugged. I'll try, no promises though. When I turned to see the guy I was fighting, he did look a bit scared, but he was trying to hide it. We began circling each other as everyone formed a circle around us, most chanting my name. Our fight started out slow, watching each other, assessing each other as we circled. It picked up the pace though. A blur of bodies as we kicked and punched, ducked and lunged. I narrowly missed getting punched in the jaw as I round-kicked his chest and sent him flying before sitting on his chest and pinning him to the ground. Alpha Knight wins. Ivan's voice boomed. I stood and my gaze locked with Klaus's, who looked like he was going to rip into the nearest person. I cleared my throat and forced a smile on my face as I looked away, searching for that stuck-up little prince. He still wasn't here, so I began walking to the house. He would train. I'd make sure of it. I searched every single room before I heard a banging in one of the single females' rooms. I opened the door without knocking and saw him with a young woman, both without their clothes. I picked up his pants and threw them at him as he turned around to yell at me. "Get up and put some pants on," I ordered. "What the hell are you doing?" he yelled at me as the girl pulled a blanket over herself, shooting scared glances at me. "Training, so put your pants on and get your $2 self out of bed before I make change." I heard the girl giggle before she peeked up at me. "Did you just quote the Avengers?" "Why, yes, I did." I chuckled as Callum got dressed. When he pulled on his pants, I grabbed his ear and left the room with a quick bye to the girl, dragging him through the pack house, out the door, and to the training fields, with him shouting profanities all the way. Everyone stopped what they were doing as I approached, and many openly laughed. I guess that it would have been a pretty funny sight. A girl dragging a man at least 5 inches taller than her across a field by his ear, while he tried to cover himself and button his jeans while swearing at her. "What's going on here?" Ivan boomed as he approached, barely concealing his laughter. "What are you doing with the prince?" I shrugged and let go of his ear, tripping and sitting on his chest when he went to leave. I told him that he'd be participating in training, same as his brothers, when he got here, and yet I found him with no intention of training. I left out the fact that he was intimate with someone to save the girl, a bit of embarrassment. "Flipping woman," Callum said under his breath. I heard it though. "What was that?" I asked, cupping my hand behind my ear and leaning down a little bit. "Sorry, I didn't hear you. What did you say?" "I said I'm keen to spar," he said louder, shooting me a tight smile. "Well, I guess you can fight Ace if you're so keen," I told him, waving over Ace. "Be sure that Hansel, his mate, doesn't get jealous," I whispered in his ear, trying to freak him out again. After all, Hansel could be scary when he was mad, and if you didn't know, he was really just a giant teddy bear. I got off him and felt a tap on my shoulder as Callum walked off with Ace. I turned around to see Klaus and Ivan standing behind me. "Klaus needs a sparring partner and I thought you'd be perfect." I nodded and gave a tight smile, not missing the satisfied gleam in his eyes. He did this on purpose. I stood opposite Klaus and began circling him, looking for any signs of weakness. It was awkward before he made the first move and went to knock me to the ground. I dodged and leapt onto his back, pinning him to the ground. He rolled over and I had to move or be pinned. We stood and he gave me a feral smirk. "Did you get my letter?" I nodded and grunted when he punched the bullet wound on my chest, right where it hurts. I grabbed his wrist and twisted, stepping behind him and forcing him to the ground. "Did you read it?" "Yeah." He swept his foot out and hit me in the shin, forcing me to drop his hand. We exchanged hits for what felt like eternity, until he tackled me to the ground by the waist. I scrambled out from under his arm and climbed atop his lap. I pinned his wrists next to his head as our breaths mingled. He looked up into my eyes with a hopeful expression. "I'm sorry, Jen. I really am sorry, and I meant everything. Could you ever find it in your heart to forgive me?" He flipped us over so I was on my back and he lay atop me, holding my wrists captive. I wrapped my legs around his waist to get some leverage but stopped when he pressed his face close to mine. "Please, Jen. I'm sorry." His voice cut straight to my heart and I felt tears well in my eyes. He hadn't been there when I needed him, but he was here now and he was sorry. Was it enough? There were a few wolf whistles and Hansel's voice. "Just kiss already. The sexual tension's killing me." I heard chuckles but they were drowned out as I looked at Klaus. Should I forgive him? Was he really sorry? Raising my head, I blew hot air across his face, making him shudder, and whispered in his ear. "Prove it. I mean, it looked like you were about to start being intimate right there. That fighting was like foreplay and everyone around you was feeling the heat. You guys have so much sexual tension. Imagine the intimacy," Davy exclaimed as we walked up the stairs to our separate rooms. I nudged her in the side and frowned, hiding a smile. I said I'd give him a chance. I'm not jumping into bed with the man. Yet, a small voice in my mind chimed. Davy wiggled her eyebrows before I chuckled and shut my door in her face. I slid down the back of it and buried my face in my hands. Did I do the right thing today? Giving him a second chance? Was I being too hard on him? It really didn't help that I had Nightingale, his sons and 50 of their men watching my every move, waiting for me to mess up. There was a knock on my door and I stood, opening it to see Nightingale. I suppressed a frown but stepped aside to let him in. He walked silently into my living room and sat down on a couch, looking around. I sat opposite him and for a few tense minutes we stared at each other. He would stare at my scars before meeting my eyes and then doing it all over again. I let him and just sat there watching his reaction. "What happened?" he asked quietly, staring at the bullet wounds on my chest and the fat, puckered scars on my arms and stomach. I shrugged and looked out the window, trying not to flash back to those terrible memories. Hunters, from when I went missing. They had a dog-fighting ring going, beat anyone who defied them. I visibly saw him suck in air before he looked down ashamed. Everyone thought you'd quit and just disappeared. Being an alpha is stressful, and no one thought you could handle the pressure. All because I'm a girl. I finished for him, shaking my head in anger. Well, you know what? No matter how hard it's gotten, I haven't and I won't give up. This was my father's pack, and it's better now than it ever was before. Nightingale nodded before running his hands over the fabric of the couch. I was out of line threatening you like that. Truth is, I would never force my sons to mate with anyone. I'm a firm believer in mates. It was wrong of me to threaten your position as alpha. You've worked harder for it than anyone else I've ever heard. It was yours by birthright, but you still had to fight for it, unlike most alpha heirs. You run this pack with an iron fist, but everyone is all the better for it. He took a breath and looked at me with sad eyes. Everyone but you. I pushed down my tears and stonily looked at him. What did those hunters do to you? Why do you isolate yourself? Of all the alphas I know you have it the toughest, yet you just push everyone away. That was the final straw. This stranger could plainly see this, and I was angry and confused. I isolate myself because I've been isolated my whole life. My father ignored me. No one would be my friend because of who my father was and because they thought I was a stuck-up woman. You have no idea how hard this is. All of it, I yelled, throwing my hands up in the air. I'm looked down on because I'm a woman in a man's job. I can shift, therefore I should be a breeding machine for the good of the species. But you know what? That'll never happen. I'm more than a brood mare. I'm better than that. I have survived through so much and I have protected this pack from more than they could ever imagine, and yet I'm still questioned and beaten down. You have no idea what those hunters did to me. Just hearing about it would give you nightmares. I stood and ran my hands through my hair in frustration and confusion as tears rolled down my cheeks. I have to be strong. I can never break down or I'll be challenged, weak. I have to constantly be a difficult person just to make sure that no one walks over the top of me. I stared at him, shaking my head. Nobody knows. Nobody can comprehend what it's like to be so lonely, so damaged. You had no right to come in here and challenge me like you did. You don't deserve to be king with the way you treated me. Your sons don't deserve the respect and love they get from people who they've never even met. Did you know that your youngest was so rude that Matt had to beg me not to hurt him? You don't deserve to be here. Get out. Get out of my room. Get out of my house. Get out of my territory and take your dogs, and your pompous sons with you, I shouted, pointing at the door. He nodded and stood to leave. My wife was abused. It gets better when you have people who love you. Out, I hissed, glaring at him. Once he turned his head, I angrily wiped away the wetness on my cheeks and went to my bedroom, lying in the middle of my bed and staring blankly out the window. I felt the bed dip before strong arms wrapped around me. Telltale warmth. Comforting sparks radiated from the man behind me, so I leant into his chest and just cried. Why did life have to be so difficult? I felt warm arms wrapped around me like steel, hands stroking my back gently, a warm breath caressing my face. I opened my eyes and stared into deep green ones. Why are you here? I asked quietly. I mean, I was glad he was with me, but it still didn't mean everything was good between us. Because right now, nothing seemed good. I heard you yelling. I came to see if you were all right, but instead found you curled up and crying in bed. I couldn't just leave you. There were no words to describe the relief I felt. He didn't leave, he stayed. I rolled onto my other side and watched the night sky out of my window while Klaus spooned me. So you're not going to reject me? I heard him whisper in my ear. I shook my head and I felt him sigh, wrapping his arms tighter around me, moving his body closer to mine. I felt him place a butterfly kiss on my shoulder. over a thick scar. He still wanted me, even with all my imperfections. He was staying. I felt a tear leak out of the corner of my eye and over my nose, but I wiped it away as I stared out at the stars, Klaus's hot breath fanning over my neck, raising goosebumps. My mind flashed back to something in his letter that really made me angry. "What did the hunters do to you?" I felt him stiffen before he sat up. I looked at him as he blankly looked out the window. I sat on my knees and held his face in my hands, knowing that if it was half as bad as what had happened to me, it'd be hard for him to talk about. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and I wanted to cry. They tested new weapons on me. Knives, guns, whips. They made me watch as my pack members were tortured. They played mind games, gave us hallucinogenic drugs, starved us, beat us, abused us. He shuddered as his eyes glazed over and I stifled a sob. I'd been beaten and forced to kill, demeaned and absolutely downtrodden, but Klaus... My God, Klaus. I wiped his tears away and wrapped my arms around his neck, placing a kiss on the side of his face and cradling him against my chest as I lay down again. That night we both cried for the horrors we'd experienced and for the trials we would soon face. He was my mate, and I couldn't stay mad at him forever though. He'd suffered enough. Sometimes I hate every single stupid word you say. Sometimes I want to slap you in your whole face. There's no one quite like you. You push all my buttons down. I know life would suck without you. At the same time, I want to hug you. I want to wrap my hands around your neck. I stared down at the beautiful invitation in my hand. It was thick card, stamped with gold ink, and invited me to the 18th birthday celebration of Fallon Nightingale, King Andrew and Queen Riley's second-born son. It was compulsorily for every alpha to attend a royal celebration, so of course I was expected to go. I groaned, throwing it onto my cluttered desk. "Don't worry, Jen," Davy said, batting her eyelashes at me from her customary spot on the couch. "I'll be your date." I heard a laugh from outside the door before Ace and Hansel walked in. "You'd make an odd pair anyway. Don't you think that Klaus would rather take her?" Hansel pointed out. Davy just stuck her tongue out at him and giggled. Klaus and I had grown closer and he occasionally slept in my room when I had a really hard day or either of us had nightmares. He didn't push me and I was glad for it. Ever since that night I kicked Nightingale out. 3 weeks ago, I'd been one big mess of emotions. It was unsettling and not okay, but neither Klaus nor Davy judged me. We'd be the hottest pair there. I shook my head and looked at Hansel. "Pack bonding night tonight?" He nodded and gave me thumbs up. "It's getting cooler? Maybe a movie night?" Davy suggested. Shrugging, I looked down at the invitation and nodded. "Sounds good, you know what to do." He nodded and gave me thumbs up. "You got it, boss. Come on, Davy." She huffed but went with him and I smiled. "Make sure to have a vote on movies, and no horrors until the kids are asleep. Ask Keegan for help," I shouted after them. I hadn't seen much of the kid recently. I heard that he'd made quite a few friends though. I'm glad both he and Davy had joined my pack. In fact, I had thought about making Davy a beta. She was tough, a fighter, a good friend, and she could handle herself and any problems that arise. So far I had 2 betas, Hansel and Matthias. Because it was such a big pack it was preferable to have more people to help. My thirds, or deltas, were Hunter and Ivan. Though I had considered asking Ace to join them but then thought better of it as he seemed content just tagging along with Hansel. It would definitely be a first. A female werecat as beta, though she couldn't shift. Marty was a cat but she was Matthias's mate, and Hansel only had increased agility with his mixed breeding. Also, my first Christmas as alpha was in 3 weeks and it was customary for families and friends to give gifts at Christmas, but unless it was a tiny pack, the alpha didn't tend to buy the pack members anything. Except those closest to them. Though my pack didn't know it, I was getting them a gift. Something I know the parents, teenagers and children would all appreciate in the near future. I was planning on building a large house in Jura Park Aargau in Switzerland, so that the pack members who wished to attend college could. It meant that they could run in the forest and still be close to ETH Zurich, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology Zurich, before hardly any members of the pack would go away to college as they either had to move to another pack, travel far, or didn't have anywhere to stay on pack lands. It meant that now the members of my pack could follow their dreams and have higher education while in a safe environment. It'd be required for anyone who wanted to move out there to take self-defense lessons, and I would make sure that the wolves had enforcers to make sure that everyone was safe, and maybe I'd send Hansel and Ace with them to keep an eye on everyone. I know that Hansel had always wanted to study architecture. Looking over the blueprints for the house, I ran a hand through my hair, letting out a frustrated sigh. My office door opened and the telltale scent of spicy vanilla wafted through the room, and a small smile spread across my face as I tried to decide whether to install speakers throughout the house. It wasn't really necessary though, and would only cost more money, so I decided to axe the idea. I felt his gaze, so I looked up to where Klaus stood, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed over his naked, gleaming chest. He shot me a charming smile before walking towards my desk. He perched on the edge, and I watched as a drop of sweat rolled down the side of his torso, across his drool-worthy abs, and towards the V pointing to his pants. I swallowed and shook my head, looking away, but not before seeing the self-satisfied smirk on his face. "What do you want?" "Just wanted to see my gorgeous, beautiful, sexy mate." I rolled my eyes and gave him a condescending look. "Compliments will get you nowhere, Klaus. Neither will being sentimental. Why are you in my office, sitting on my desk, staring at me?" "No one else wants to fight me," he whined. I snorted and shook my head. "Seriously? You came up here because you wanted me to fight you?" "Please, there's nothing else to do here." I scoffed, and looked up at him. "Okay then, we'll put you to work." I stood and grabbed his arm. "The floors need to be swept and mopped, all 10 communal bathrooms cleaned, DVD cases sorted, house dusted from bottom to top. You can cook all the food for dinner tonight, wash the dishes, clean the windows from top to bottom. Laundry washed, dried and full." He cut me off by pressing me against a wall, boxing me in with his body, a hand on either side of my face. "Please, Jen." His breath washed over my face as he moved closer to me. "Fight me?" "In a griot." I shook my head as a teasing smile came onto my face. "No. You'd cry like a little girl when I beat you," I said, standing on my tippy toes and lacing a soft kiss on his chin before ducking out from under his arms and running down the hall. "Do you ladies need any help?" I asked as I walked into the kitchen where 20 women were cooking for just under 1,000 hungry wolves. "No, we've got it all sorted, Alpha, though it would be wonderful to have a taste tester." They were cooking meatballs and spaghetti in giant pots and garlic bread in the oven, so she passed me a spoon filled with saucy meat for me. I blew on it a little bit, and when the meat touched my taste buds it was like sex in my mouth. I moaned and chewed, nodding and smiling at the women. "Amazing." She laughed and pointed behind me, and I turned to find Klaus watching me with lustful eyes. "Give her another." I snorted and put the spoon into the sink. "Go do something else other than following me around," I told him, walking out of the kitchen. I wanted to see what the movie lineup was, but Klaus blocked my way. "You sure that you don't want to fight?" I huffed and turned to him, hands on my hips. "If you ask me that one more time, I will make sure that you have babysitting duties for months," I threatened, knowing exactly how rambunctious the pups could get. He grinned and nodded. "Okay. Would you like to spar with me?" I narrowed my eyes and shook my head. 2 weeks. Please. You'll get to punch me. That is, if you can catch me," he taunted. 1 month. "I mean, I know you don't like being beaten, but are you really scared of losing?" he asked. 2 months. I'll even let you have 1 hit." I lunged for him and knocked him to the ground, straddling his waist and glaring down at him. "I will hurt you if you keep taunting me. I have things to do, things that do not include you," I growled. He smirked and flipped up over. "It worked though." He sighed and stood, helping me to my feet. "Fine. I'll leave you alone, for now." Brushing off my jeans, I nodded. "Good, because I'm getting sick of seeing your ugly face." Oh, how untrue that was. He was one of the most beautiful men I knew, and he was all mine. I loved taunting and teasing him though, and he returned it tenfold. I guess that was just how we worked. I'd forgiven him and given him a second chance, but I wasn't going to let myself fall for him. Not so soon. We may be mates, but honestly that means nothing to me. All it is physical attraction. We still had to work on the relationship aspect. He bit on his fist and rubbed his naked chest. The lady doth protest too much, methinks. I rolled my eyes and shook my head before walking away. Secretly, I did like this teasing side of Klaus. When I met him, he was so serious and on edge. Then when he came back, he was sad and broken. Now it seemed that he was a bit happier. I guess not constantly being on the run can make someone a bit happier. Well, that and free from hunters and the pain, shame and humiliation they bring. Alpha! I walked into the home theater where just over 100 small kids had been arguing over which movie to watch, while Davy, Keegan and Hansel all stood up the front watching. I was stampeded by the pups who all grabbed onto my legs, pushing and shoving each other. One little girl around the age of 4 fell to the ground and immediately burst into tears. Without a second though, I scooped her up and rubbed her back as he tears wet the shoulder of my shirt. Despite not wanting any of my own just now, I did like children, though they were very energetic and hard to handle sometimes. She stopped crying immediately, so I sat down on a couch and sat her on my lap as the kids gathered around my feet. Pups always felt safe around their alpha, and I think that it was due to the fact that I made them feel safe and loved as the leader of their family, albeit a very large one. "What you kidly winks watching tonight?" I asked them. There were shouts of Finding Nemo, The Little Mermaid, Up, Toy Story, and my personal favorite, Despicable Me. I checked the time and smiled. "How about we watch Up, then Toy Story, and then Despicable Me?" I suggested. They all cheered, so Davy and Keegan spread cushions on the floor, so it was like one giant pillow bed, and we all settled in to watch movies. "Good night." I placed a kiss on the forehead of the beautiful blue-eyed little cherub. The kids had watched all 3 movies and eaten. Now they were getting taken up to their rooms to brush their teeth and bed. They were all lined up and I was kissing each one good night. It took 10 minutes, and when I looked up at the door, I saw Klaus leaning against it, watching me with a tenderness that made my heart skip a beat. "Have you had dinner yet?" he asked. I shook my head and he chuckled. "I guess Despicable Me was just too good, wasn't it?" I chuckled and nodded, standing and stretching my tight muscles. "Has everyone already eaten?" He shook his head as he watched me stretch. "Mostly just the ones with children. Everyone else is waiting for you." "Let's not keep them waiting then." I walked ahead of him to the main dining room where there were dozens of tables side by side to form a giant open box. One table was higher than the rest. The table I sat at with my betas and any guests there may be. Tonight I joined everyone else who were all talking as the food was brought out to the table. I took a large tray off one woman who was balancing a pot of spaghetti, and she gave me a grateful smile. I lay it down on the nearest table, and then took a seat next to Davy and Ace, Hansel on his right. The room was warm and filled with smiling faces, lots of chatter and great-smelling food. For once I felt happy, carefree. This is what a pack was. A community where every single wolf was important, loved and safe. It was family. I caught Klaus's eye as he sat next to Keegan and Marty a few seats down from me. Giving him a small smile, I accessed the room again. For once, I didn't feel so alone. "You shouted out, but I can't hear a word you say." "I'm talking loud, not saying much. I'm criticized, but all your bullets ricochet. You shoot me down, but I get up." "You're just going to leave me?" I yelled at Klaus, hurling a shoe at him. "I'm not leaving, you're leaving." I dodged a pillow he threw at me head and growled. "Then why won't you come with me?" I shouted back, throwing a bag at him. "Because there are alphas there who want me dead." I guess that it was a big mistake asking him to come with me to Nightingale's celebration because we'd been arguing for what seemed like hours, going around in circles. My room looked like a war zone. Clothes, pillows, shoes and books lay scattered everywhere. "Fine then, get out!" I yelled, dragging a suitcase from in my closet and loading it with clothes. "Fine then." The door slammed behind him and I huffed, pulling out clothes for the 3-day stay. I was taking Davy, Hunter, Hansel and Ace, while Matthias, Marty and Ivan were content to stay behind. I trusted them in my absence anyway. I packed a few pairs of jeans, my leather pants, some form-fitting shirts, leather jacket, a few singlets, my boots, workout gear and obviously bras, socks and underwear. I was in the middle of packing toiletries and makeup when Davy burst into my room, literally jumping. Gosh, I am so excited for this, she squealed. This was where Davy and I were different. I didn't care to meet any more pompous alphas. Davy, however, loved new experiences and she wasn't afraid to meet new people. Have you packed your gown and shoes yet? I shook my head and hauled my suitcase onto my bed before heading back into my closet for a dress and heels to wear to Fallon's birthday. Shit, Jenna, what happened in here? Davy asked after she had calmed down and actually realized what a mess my room was. Klaus. He threw your clothes around? I'm sorry, but I can't imagine him going into your closet and just chucking your clothes everywhere, wearing them. Maybe. But I don't think he's that childish to trash your room. What were you arguing about? I wanted him to come with us but he refused. I called from in the closet. She appeared a few minutes later, once I was still searching through the mass amount of clothes. I didn't even know I had half this stuff. She shoved me away and gave a cheeky smile. Let me choose your dresses. You're hopeless. I would have been offended, but I knew that she was right. Dress picking was not my forte. I tended to stick with pants and jackets. 5 minutes later, Davy emerged holding a black dress bag with a great big smile on her face. I borrowed one for myself as well. You have the most beautiful clothes, Jen. I nodded and smiled sadly. I was my dad's way of making up for his absence. He bought me off with clothes I never wore. But they're such beautiful clothes, she wistfully, making me laugh. You'd think that she was a tomboy with her tough attitude and normal clothes. But get her in a room of dresses and she's happier than a kid with cake. Come on, are you packed? I checked the time and realized we really had to be going soon if we wanted to make it to the royal castle in Alaska on time. Though from what I'd heard, we were one of the last groups to arrive. Yeah, that's why I came up here. She slung the bag over her shoulder, holding the clothes hook and gestured to my bag. Let's go. She ran down the stairs and I followed after. Somehow it felt like I was walking to my doom. I'll see you in a few days, I said to Matthias, Marty and Ivan, who all stood outside the house with some of the guys from the pack. Marty hugged me around the waist before I got in the car with Hansel, Ace, Davy and Hunter. Davy pushed me into one of the 2 rooms on the jet and laid the dress bag on the bed with a pair of red heels. All eyes will be on you when we walk in, so you've got to look like a goddess. I snorted and watched as she pulled out makeup and then unzipped the bag to reveal a beautiful dress. It was black and white with beautiful patterns. It was like a beautiful china cup and the patterns, gosh, they were indescribable. I didn't even know I had this. I went to run my hand over the beautiful fabric but Davy batted my hand away. No, first, we do your hair and makeup. I sighed and sat on the edge of the bed as she applied foundation over my tanned, already flawless skin, black eyeliner and a light smoky eye, mascara and bright red lipstick. She pinned my hair up and within the hour I was ready to put on the dress and enter the royal's domain. I slipped out of my clothes and into the dress, which zipped up at the back. It fit me like a glove and molded to my curves, the neckline ending at the base of my neck with capped sleeves. Davy wore a beautiful wine-red scoop-necked dress with paneling, lace windows on the bodice, and a lace-over layer on the skirt. She had her bright blue hair down in loose curls and her makeup consisted of blue eyeliner and nude lips. When we walked out of the room, the boys had also cleaned up and wore smart jeans and button-up shirts. I grinned and adjusted the tie Hunter wore when he whistled. Hot damn, you look stunning, Jen. Gosh, it feel like just yesterday when you were a beautiful little baby and now look at you. He spun me around in a circle and I laughed. Thanks, Hunt. He was my favorite family member. Well, the only one related to me by blood. Hunter was actually my 3rd cousin, but he was more of an uncle. You clean up pretty well too. The pilot's voice came through the speakers, so we all strapped in for landing. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't impressed. The car Nightingale had sent for us wove through the forest and in the distance I could see part of the castle peeking over the treetop. It sat in the middle of the forest, at the base of Mount McKinley. Wow, Davy breathed as we drove up a driveway, through a high stone arch, finally pulling up into a large courtyard that had a circular drive with gardens on all sides, and a beautiful fountain sitting in the circle of the driveway. The entrance to the giant stone castle was a huge pair of wooden doors which stood open, giving a peek of the foyer that lead deeper into the castle. Wolves came rushing out to take our bags and show us where we were staying. I scooted over and set a red-heeled foot on the gravel driveway as everyone else got out. It felt good to stretch my legs after a 17-hour flight and 10-minute drive sandwiched between Davy and Ace. We walked up 5 steps and into the foyer, where we were greeted by a woman dressed in jeans and what looked like very soft cashmere jumper. "I'm Ariel, Andrew's mother, the previous queen." I took her hand and gave her a smile. "Jenna Knight. These are my betas Hansel, his mate Ace and Davina, and my Delta Hunter," I said, gesturing to each of them. "Would you be able to show us our rooms, as it was a long flight?" She frowned a little. "Since your group has been the last to arrive, they've already started. I can show you where the luncheon is?" she suggested. "All right." We followed her through the castle and into a magnificent ballroom, which led to a room off to the side. She opened the door and we walked in to find around 40 women sitting, talking, drinking tea and eating sweet cakes and little triangle sandwiches. They watched as we walked in and many narrowed their gazes on I and Davy. These women were the alpha females and beta females of their packs, and held on to the old ways, that women should not be alphas. Though none of them looked it, they were old and still held on to the values they were taught growing up. Because supernatural beings didn't age, some were over centuries old. "Ladies, this is Alpha Jenna Knight, her betas Davina, Ace, Hansel, Ace and Delta Hunter." She introduced us to the women in the group and led us over to a table on the outskirts of the group. "The only one. We're just waiting on my daughter-in-law who'll be hosting this luncheon." At that moment a beautiful woman walked through the door wearing a pretty navy scoop neck dress with white birds covering the fabric. She had beautiful light brown hair that fell in waves around her oval face. She had full pink lips, a straight, petite nose, but her most stunning feature by far were her eyes. They were such an intense blue I felt like they looked right into my soul. I could see that her legs had faint silver scars all over them, and I admit that I was curious. She walked with all the grace of a queen, and I knew that this was Riley Nightingale. She was greatly loved for her kind nature and gentle spirit. It was well known throughout the packs just how much her mate, the king, loved and cherished her. "I'm sorry everyone, Callie would not sleep." She chuckled, her voice light and melodic. She had a faint accent. From Ireland, I think, and it seemed to make her more ethereal. Callie must have been her newborn daughter, the princess. "Oh, it's quite all right," one woman said, standing and giving a small curtsy. "Newborns can be such a hassle. We understand." Her gaze landed on me with a slight smug grin, and I rolled my eyes. What? Was she better than me because she had children? Fat chance. Just because she opened her legs doesn't make her better. The queen's gaze moved over to me and my group, and she smiled. "Jenna Knight?" I nodded and she approached our table. "My husband told me a lot about his visit to you, said that it was very enlightening." Her words held double meaning, and I could see in her eyes that she wanted to talk to me after. Matt and Fallon thoroughly enjoyed it. I gave her a tight smile and nodded. "Thank you. May I ask where they are? Where the rest of the alphas are?" I knew that if the women were having some fancy lunch, then the alphas and their betas wouldn't just be sitting around. "I'm not sure actually. Probably in the conference room." I gave her a smile and stood, towering over her with my skyscraper heels. "And where would the conference room be?" "I'll get someone to take you, but you're more than welcome to stay," she said, smiling up at me. "No, I'm not welcome here," I said, looking around at the icy looks the other women gave me. "And you think that you're welcome there?" The same woman who'd greeted the queen spoke up. "You're in a job made for a man and you should just accept that and leave the running of a pack to someone else, someone more qualified. Perhaps my mate?" she said with a fake mate. I gave her an equally fake smile and stepped towards her. "Perhaps you could encourage him to challenge me, that is, if you want him to die. I'm not stepping down anytime soon, and if you say something like that to my face again, you will sorely regret it," I said in an emotionless, cold tone. There was a knock on the door, and Will strode in. He saw me and a bright smile lit up his face. "Jen, I was looking for you. The alphas are all in the conference room. We noticed your absence and thought you'd want to be there," he explained, walking up to me and kissing me on the cheek. I turned to the woman and gave her a smirk. "Have a nice lunch, ladies." I bowed my head to Queen Riley, and then, with the boys and Davy following me, left. We walked down a cool stone corridor, the echo of mine and Davy's heels reverberating against the walls. I heard what that woman said to you, Will said, after a few minutes' silence. She's the Crimson Hollow's Luna, a real power-hungry bitch, and her mate knows it. He lets her walk over the top of him and she just uses him for his power. Alpha Jennings ran the Crimson Hollows and was a decent-mannered man from recollection. The Crimson Hollows was a family pack and is one of the biggest in America. I guess that made her think that she could take me on. She was stupid in thinking that. I had the biggest pack in the world and, although there were families, it mostly consisted of warriors. I nodded as we reached a door. Yes, I can see that happening. She's the most idiotic, small-minded woman I've met yet. And I've dealt with Lonnie and that rouge whore who stayed with Klaus's pack. Lonnie was still in my pack, but had obviously let go whatever she had with me, and I hadn't had to deal with her since I returned from my stay with Miller. Have a word with him afterwards then, he advised before opening the door. I walked in first with a confident stride, and accessed each man in the room. I remember seeing many of these men at the Alpha Challenge, but I hadn't met many. There were 20 alphas and their betas who sat around the table with Nightingale and his sons. The talk stopped when I walked in and they all looked at the newcomers. Each alpha had from 70 to over a couple hundred wolves in their packs, and were all from across the world. Alpha Knight, Nightingale said, bowing his head slightly. The other alphas looked puzzled at his sign of respect as I sat down. Will pulling my chair out for me and pushing it back in when I sat down. Why was I not informed that there was a meeting in place when I arrived? I asked, looking around at the men who bowed their heads. My mother thought that you'd rather had lunch after your flight, Nightingale said. I noted that there was an array of food off to the side on a separate table, and every man had a plate before them. I let it go though. They'd seen me in action, and I knew that I wasn't one of them. They were still comfortable with a female alpha, and I knew that it would take a long time for them to accept it. Many were stuck in their old ways. It's what happened when many were centuries old. We were discussing the hunters' movement. Do you have anything to add? Nightingale asked as Davy took a seat next to me and handed me a plate loaded with food. Are you planning a movement against them? I asked, biting into a grape. No. Alpha Bruin has a compound on his land, and they've been moving closer in the past year and needs to decide what to do about them. Kill them. Every single one. Men, women and children, I said calmly, biting into a biscuit. I was famished and this food was really good. He and a few others looked horrified and he sputtered, realizing that I was completely serious. Surely the women and children should be spared? He asked, his voice a few pitches higher. You underestimate them. There are hunters who are women and have the same mindset as their counterparts. They bring up their children with their ideals and another generation of hunters is born. I answered smoothly. Why are they such a danger? Surely they can't find us if we're careful enough? I shook my head and crossed my arms. No, they know exactly what to look for and they will find you. Must have had enough practice to spot a worm miles away. How do you know so much about them? Another alpha asked. I turned to look at Davy and stood, turning my back to them. Davy, please unzip my dress. It wasn't a request from one friend to another, it was an order from one alpha to her insubordinates. I knew that she would protest and I didn't need these alphas to see my beta questioning my judgment, no matter how good of a friend she was. I felt cold air hit my back as she unzipped it, and I held the flaps wide enough for them to see the horrible scars on my back. I spent some time with the hunters. I know how they function. Davy zipped me back up and I sat back down and resumed eating calmly, though I was shaking a little inside. I was bombarded with questions from the alphas, and I steeled myself to answer them. I was doing this because they needed to understand that hunters were a serious issue and could hurt even the strongest of wolves. You may have heard of the few months I disappeared. That was because I was taken by hunters, hundreds who ambushed me when I pulled ahead on a pack run. They put me in a fighting ring, and when I refused, they punished me. I took a deep breath and looked at each and every man. They do horrible things to people who don't deserve it. If you don't eradicate them all, more will replace them. I sat back and let my words sink in. And when they did, I knew that they would heed my warning, and the hideous reminder of the fact that we were not the monsters. They were. I ran my hands down the side of my dress, staring at the girl in the mirror. That couldn't be me. Her hair was in perfect soft waves, falling around her face and down her back in thick black waves. Her makeup was perfection. Heavy smoky eye that made her blue eyes stand out like gems with nude lips. Her dress clung to every curve, molding to her like a black, lacy second skin. Her legs stretched for miles in sky-high black heels, and her skin looked creamy and smooth. I touched my face, and the girl in the mirror did the same. It was me. I stared at my exposed shoulders, my eyes running over the silver scars littering my skin. They were fading. Davy walked to stand next to me in a stunning golden dress that fitted to her curves and trailed to a beautiful transparent material just above her knees. Her vibrant blue hair was in a faux wavy bob, and she looked amazing. "We look so good," she said, smoothing a hand over the fabric of her dress. "Thank you for bringing me. Thanks for standing by me." As my friend and my beta, there was a knock at the door and Davy walked over to answer it. "Wow, Jen," the boys breathed as they walked in. Ace and Hansel were going together and Hunter was escorting Davy, while Will would be my date for tonight, since my stupid, stubborn, devastatingly handsome mate ditched me. "You guys clean up well," I said, smoothing a hand over their lapels. "You look beautiful. As always, Alpha," Will teased, kissing the back of my hand. "Thanks, Will." I knew that he wasn't interested anymore. We had fun, but now we were friends. He knew I had a mate and he respected that. "Come on, guy. Let's go have some fun." Davy cheered, taking the arm Hunter offered. They left with Ace and Hansel. Will smiled down at me and touched the corner of my lip. "Cheer up, Buttercup. Tonight's meant to be fun. It's not your funeral, so lighten up, love." I forced a smile and took his arm as we walked out the door. As we drew closer to the throne room, which doubled as a ballroom, the sound of loud chatter reached my ear, and I could smell the scent of many wolves. Hundreds. I walked down the steps with Will as the orchestra played while beautiful women in fancy gowns and handsome men in tuxedos mingled. I gripped Will's arm as we reached the bottom steps, and were bombarded with people trying to talk to us, to me. I saw Matt and Fallon approaching, and stepped forward to wish Fallon a happy birthday. Someone pushed into my shoulder, and I turned to glare at the woman who'd so obviously just hit me. She sneered and flicked her hair. "Watch where you're going, bitch," she hissed. I rolled my eyes and turned away, facing Matt and Fallon who were both glaring at her. "That woman needs to learn respect," Fallon muttered. "Especially for you." I smiled and gave him a quick huge on his cheek. "Happy birthday, Princey." He chuckled and patted my back. "Thanks, Alpha. It's been a great year and the ball is amazing," he said loud enough for the people around us to hear. I snorted and rolled my eyes, standing on my tiptoes so I could reach his ear. "Is it really?" "No, I would rather have a movie night with tons of food and friends, but my parents organized it," he muttered, and I heard Matt laugh. "It's what we'd all prefer. So many of these wolves are so two-faced." "Well, you're the future king's right-hand man. You'll have to get used to it. And you will, over time." "It sounds like you're speaking from experience," he said, watching me skeptically. "Have you gotten used to it? Running such a huge pack, fighting the other alphas off your territory, and dealing with them as you put it." I spun and grabbed a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. "No," I threw it all back and swallowed, getting a light buzz before it disappeared. "Werewolves, unfortunately, couldn't get drunk because our bodies burn it too quickly with our high metabolism. We had this because our bodies sustained two beings, so we ran hot, ate shitloads. We're moody, temperamental and hot-headed, but I wouldn't change it for anything. The feeling of being able to shift made it all worth it." He chuckled and threw an arm over my shoulder as Matt began making conversation with Davy and Hunter. "You know, Alpha. You know you should organize more of those training sessions. Really kicked my ass. You could gain alliances with other packs if you took a few of their warriors and trained them up as the main pack protectors." I grinned and shrugged. "I could, but I won't. I'd be way too much of a hassle. The rooms, food, plumbing and electricity bills, the danger they would be to my pack members if they didn't follow the rules, and so many other variables. I already had alliances with most of the packs anyway, as no one wanted to cross me." The orchestra began playing a different tune, and Fallon smiled at me. "Care to dance, milady?" I wrinkled my nose and shook my head. "Sorry, no. I don't dance." He gave me puppy dog eyes and pouted. "You'd say no to the birthday boy?" That's low, Jenna. Real low. I sighed as the people around us began pairing off. Fine. One dance. He smiled and pulled me close to him as I rested a hand on his shoulder and placed my other in his. He spun me around the floor as the music drifted through the room. So, what'd you get for your birthday? I asked. Some new clothes? A laptop? Not too much, he replied, dipping me before pulling my body flush against his again. A little birdie told me that you found your mate. Where is he? Shouldn't he be ripping my arms off for touching you? I frowned and twirled around. No, he ditched me. He's a rouge and didn't want to cause a stir if he showed up here. He wouldn't rip your limbs off either. We have a very untraditional mating bond. The song ended and I pulled away as Fallon bowed. Thank you, Alpha Knight. It was a pleasure talking to you again. I nodded as he walked off to mingle with his guests and smiled when Will bought me a glass of champagne. Thanks. Dinner will be served soon. How's you night been? He asked. All right, I guess. Be better if I was at home, but it would have been rude not to have come, and I do like Fallon. What about you? Danced with any beautiful ladies? I asked, nudging his shoulder. I saw crippling sadness pass through his eyes before he nodded. Well, there's one beautiful lady who I hoped would grant me a dance, but alas, I hear that she will accept no one, save for the birthday boy. I smiled and placed my empty glass on a passing tray. Who would this beautiful woman be? I joked. He rested a hand against his chest and gave me a look that just said, really? Why the stunning Alpha Jenna Knight, of course. Why not? Come on, Will. I took his head, placing his glass on a tray before pulling him into the middle of the room. I could only thank God that Dad had made me do dance lessons when I was a little girl, before we grew apart. I could only hope that they stuck. Will took me in his arms as the music picked up into a sensual tango as I positioned my weight on my heels, heads forward, head back to counterbalance. Will lead as we smoothly slid across the dance floor, kicking, twirling, spinning, and dipping me. I admit that I had fun in those few minutes, and when the final note played I was a little disappointed. A bell chimed and we were led into a great dining room where silverware was laid out and everyone had their assigned seats. Will escorted me to the table and pulled my chair out before leaving to his seat. The table was a hierarchy. Royals at the head, then the alphas of the biggest packs, with their betas and any other wolves they may have bought with them. I was seated directly next to Callum. Across from me was Flynn, the third prince, and beside him sat Hansel and Ace. Davy was next to me with Hunter, and then the next alpha and his Luna, beta and beta female. Serves came out with the appetizers and conversation picked up around the table. Have you been alpha? Matt asked from across the table. Good, rouges have been at an all-time low. I picked up a bread roll and cut into it, and picked up a fancy knife before spreading soft butter onto the warm bun. You? Well, now we've got a little sister to add to the mix. His eyes held so much love for the little girl he was talking about. I knew that they were all ecstatic. I bet she's a cutie, especially with how stunning both her parents and her siblings were. Yes, she's beautiful. Thank God she's got 4 older brothers to beat the boys off, otherwise she'd cause a riot when she was older. I smiled and bit into my bun as an annoying, high-pitched voice from further down the table attracted my attention. I turned my head to meet the glare of the Crimson Hollow's Luna. Why the hell is she seated so close to the royals? That bitch doesn't deserve half the things that's handed to her. That comment really rubbed me the wrong way. I wasn't handed anything. I earned it. I earned the pack even though it was mine by birthright. I earned the trust and respect of my men through my skills as both a fighter and an alpha. My pack respected me. They didn't get that handed to me. I earned it. Her betas should at least be at the bottom of the table. I mean, they don't even have any actual beta blood. She's just found a few mangy mutts. Not like our pack. Oh, so now she was insulting my friends. The people who stood by me when times were tough, no matter how much I pushed them away. I gripped the handle of the butter knife and glared at her. As entertaining as it would be to stab that whore, I don't think that my parents would appreciate blood on their nicest tablecloths. Callum's voice chimed from beside me. Growling lowly, it took all my willpower to loosening my grip on the knife as she continued. I mean, who is she anyway? I should be there, sitting with the princes. I've got more nobility in my little finger than she has in her whole body. I took a deep breath and ignored her, looking to Callum with barely suppressed rage. Who was this whore? Where did she get off talking about me like that? Talking about anyone like that? Don't worry, she's tried to proposition at least all of us twice. She's not actually the Luna of the Crimson Hollows, just his fiancée. She calls herself the Luna, but he's only dating her because his father wanted him to at least be engaged before he took over the pack. She's a shit Luna from what I've seen though. Treats the pack like her own personal slaves. Well, Callum and I seem to have found common ground, our hate for the gold digger. You should challenge her, babe. I'm sure that she'd be easy to beat. She's all bark but no bite, I bet. I smirked coldly at her as Jennings wisely shook his head. No, I'm not going to go against Alpha Knight even if I wanted. She's ruthless and deserves more respect from you. She's brave and a fighter. She more than deserves her pack, and it would be wise to shut your mouth before she shuts it for you, he said, shaking his head and casting glance in my direction. But she whined. Don't you want a bigger pack? More money? More wolves to work for us? I sneered in disgust at the way she objectified my pack member. They weren't slaves or pawns to gain more power. They were people with thoughts and feelings, dreams and desires. It was disgusting the way that she thought of them as nothing more than slaves or a means to more power. I pushed back my chair and stood, looking at the disgusting excuse of a Luna. Jennings saw me, stood and slapped a hand over her mouth. No, Imogen, be quiet, he hissed. I watched as she pushed his hand off and slapped it away. No, I will not be quiet. You challenge her for her pack or no sex for a year, she yelled as all conversation stopped. He beat me to the punch in a deadly voice. This is the last time you act like a child, Imogen. If you don't shape up, then you will no longer be Luna of the Crimson Hollows. I've tolerated your foolish and selfish behavior for long enough. You either become a good Luna, and quickly, or you'll find yourself out on your ass. She whimpered and looked around at the people staring at her. Daddy wouldn't let you, it's his pack. Not anymore, darling, he said sarcastically. He gave it to me in exchange for you, but I could easily challenge him. He's weak. Face it, Imogen, you're worthless. Even your own father didn't want you. He threw you and the pack away like yesterday's trash. I'd feel bad for her if she hadn't been acting like a greedy cow only seconds before. Obviously Alpha Jennings had also gotten sick of her foolish antics. I'm truly sorry, Alpha Knight, Jennings said, standing as his mate ran off in tears. Rest assured that I would never challenge you. Imogen's father was too soft on her bad behavior and it seems to have manifested, he said sadly. Rest assured I will not be so lenient any longer. I nodded and sat down, thankful that she was gone. More servers came out with trays and tray loaded with any kind of food imaginable. Ah, dinner's here, Queen Riley said in relief. Everybody dig in and enjoy. And we did. 'Cause the food was really, really good. And it turned out to be the only good part of this whole visit. After the celebrations began winding down, I had a bad taste in my mouth and a terrible feeling in my stomach. I got undressed and took off most of my makeup, whatever I could get off with the wipes Davy gave me. I left my hair, knowing that it would probably be a rat's nest in the morning, but I couldn't find it in me to care. Something was going to happen. I just didn't know what. I changed into a fitted crop top and boy shorts before switching off the light and climbing into bed. I stared at the ceiling for hours, thinking about everything. Yet nothing. I heard a scratch from outside my door, and my instant instinct was to tense. Instead, I let my body relax, and I closed my eyes, straining all my senses. I knew the moment they stepped into the room. The coppery scene of blood filled my nose, and I had to use all the self-control I possessed to keep still, my pulse steady and my muscles relaxed. I could feel their gaze, hear their footsteps as they slowly approached my bed. I felt them run a hand across my brow, so lightly I wouldn't have felt it had I not been on edge. Slowly they ran their hand down my nose, skimming my lips and down my chin. Slowly I felt them get on the bed and straddle my waist, barely touching me. Their caress sent cold, uneasy shivers down my spine. Their hands met at the base of my throat and suddenly, it was like there was a boa constrictor around my neck. I knew that they were going to try to strangle me or snap my neck. But that wasn't going to happen. I bolted up and threw them to the floor, jumped on top of my attacker and beating their face to a pulp. They elbowed me in the ribs and tried to escape, but I grabbed onto the leg, squeezing until I heard a crack. He growled and fell to the ground. I grabbed his neck and put him in a chokehold before standing and dragging him out my door. Everyone get up. Check your rooms for any intruders. Get your asses out of bed. I kicked on doors, dragged groggy people out of bed, and yelled the house down, all while keeping this guy in a headlock. I walked down the stairs, dragging him along, and every time his broken leg hit the floor he'd growl and snap, but I just choked him like he'd planned to do to me. Slowly wolves began trickling out of their rooms, and when everyone was in the room I dumped him on the floor and crouched down, keeping a hand on his throat and a knee on his balls. Check every room, I ordered. Make sure that everyone is alive and well. I heard some people leaving the room, and focused my attention on the wolf under me. He had murky brown eyes, tanned skin, and his face was covered in blood. His blood. Why are you here? He smirked and spat blood at me. Isn't it obvious? I heard a scream and my heart began beating faster. I'm here to kill you. Well, you didn't do a very good job, did you? I asked sarcastically. He grinned and shrugged. I don't know about that. I heard footsteps pounding down the stairs and Davy burst through the crowd with wide eyes. Will's dead. It took a few minutes to sink in, but when it did, I locked down my emotions until I only felt rage. This man had killed my friend and now he was underneath me, laughing. That's what happens when you mess with Fugo. I looked down at him blankly, and slowly a malicious grin formed on my face. He saw the look in my eyes and his laughter began dying down. I leant close to him and whispered in his ear. And this is what happens when you cross me. I'll make sure to give my regards to Fugo when I see him. And kill him. Because this means war. I let my hand transform into claws, stopping mid-shift. Something unheard of. Well, that was until my mother, and now, me. I let the tips of my claws rest above his heart before I slowly began digging them in. Blood pooled in my palms as I sat atop him and clawed my way slowly, precisely to his heart. His face was pale, sweat dripping down his brow as he bit on his lip to keep from screaming, drawing blood. I twisted my hand and he let out an ear-piercing scream before I grasped his beating heart and ripped it out of his body. His corpse slumped against the marble floor, the life draining from his eyes as I stood, holding the bloody organ in my hand and looked around the crowd. Mostly men with a few women. Alpha Knight, there's a call for you. A teenage boy ran through the crowd and handed me a mobile before his eyes landed on the heart. I held, to the dead body covered in blood. A huge hole in his front. He looked like he was going to be sick as he handed me the phone. I plonked the heart in his outstretched hand and patted him on the shoulder. His eyes rolled back into his head and he collapsed right in front of me. Knight, I said, rolling my eyes and turning my back. Alpha, there's been an attack, Matthias's deep voice said through the phone. They killed 20 men, and there's no sign of Klaus. A cracking sound filled my ear as I lowered the now broken phone. I spotted Davy, Ace, Hansel and Hunter in the crowd watching me with worried eyes. Get your stuff, we're leaving. What the hell happened? I asked as I shifted, running down to the infirmary where Matthias sat in a bed, cradling his arm. They came from nowhere. Attacked with no provocation, they killed 20 men before they just pulled away and disappeared. I rubbed my forehead and stopped myself from breaking down. It wouldn't help right now. How are the families holding up? He sighed and looked down at Marty, who was curled up on his lap, tear streaks on her cheeks. The grieving families are all curled up in the home theater together. And Klaus? I asked, standing straight, with my eyes focused forward as I asked. What happened to him? After we went through the house to make sure that there were no intruders, and that everyone was okay, we couldn't find him, and he left a note. It's in his room. It looks fishy, Jen. I could hear how hesitant he was to tell me, and when I looked into his eyes, I saw tears leaking down his cheeks. There had been 2 times I'd seen him cry. When my father died and when I got back from the hunters. It had to be bad. I left him and ran up the stairs, avoiding everyone. They would blame me. I wasn't there to protect my pack, and now we'd lost good men. Men with families who were downstairs grieving. I threw open the door to his room and was overwhelmed by his scent. Clothes were tossed everywhere. Furniture was overturned. There were claw marked on the walls and blood splattered covered the glass of a broken window. I collapsed in the center of his bed, burying my face in his pillow, breathing in his scent. Paper crinkled underneath me as I moved, and I pulled out a crunched-up piece of paper. I never cared about you, Jenna. I'm leaving. Don't try to find me because you won't. It was scribbled in blue pen and was extremely messy, like he'd been in a rush and there was blood splattered across the crinkled white paper. Nothing added up. I knew that this isn't Klaus's writing, and I know that he wouldn't have left during the middle of an attack, unless it was Fuego, and he was taken. I grabbed the letter and threw the door open, running out of the room. All the high-ranking warriors in the conference room now. I ordered through the pack link. I guess that they knew how agitated and serious I was right now, because 5 minutes later I was looking at my best 30 fighters, including Hunter, Hansel, Ace, Davy, Matthias and Giannis. Marty was sitting between her son and her mate as I spoke, holding up the letter. Klaus is missing. He left a letter, but he didn't write it. He's been taken and those wolves were a distraction so they could get him out of the house. Fuego has him. I told them what I thought and why. Nothing added up when viewed separately, but once you took a step back and looked at all the facts it was clear. Fuego had sent a man to kill Will and me. He attacks my pack as my mate goes missing. His room shows signs of a struggle and the note is clearly not his. Fuego holds a grudge against my mate, so he takes him to hurt both of us. 2 birds with 1 stone. I know that he's on a quest for power, and that he's takes my mate, whom he holds a grudge against, and kills anyone who stands in his way. Did he want me gone so he could take my pack? Would he kill everyone if he got the chance? I wouldn't let him. It was time I had a talk with this Fuego, and would he regret the day he crossed me. Send out the best trackers, find them, I ordered Matthias. I want training and patrols doubled. And make sure that no one is ever alone. Fuego could be close and I'm not taking any chances. The house is officially on lockdown. No one gets in or out without my permission. Everyone nodded, understanding the severity of the situation as I dismissed them. I would hold a pack meeting tonight before dinner and everyone would be notified of the changes. I only hope to God that we found Klaus, and soon, before it's too late. They trespassed onto my territory, they attacked my pack, took my mate and made a fool out of me. I will not allow it to happen again, and the ones responsible will be sorry that they ever crossed me. I told the wolves before me, the men and women of the pack. Patrols will be doubled. Training will be tripled, and the house is now on lockdown. No one gets in or out without my permission. The room erupted in panicked voices and growls. I knew the restriction would make them panic, but since I have such a large territory, spanning just under half the world, it was impossible to search every single part. I'd try, and I'd make sure that they wouldn't get past the patrols, which covered a radius of 5 miles around the house. Quiet. My voice cut through the fray and everyone settled down. Why are you panicking? They're not going to hurt our family again. I won't let them, I promised. I'm your alpha, and as alpha it's my duty to stand in the way of any danger. I will kill these men. I gestured for the best 50 trackers to follow me as I headed towards my downstairs office. Once the last man had closed the door behind him, I divided them into group and handed them all maps. The highlighted areas are the places you'll cover with your group. Search for any signs of wolves and track any clues you find. Memorize your area, and don't be seen as a wolf, because I don't have enough planes to fly you all across the globe. Good luck, gentlemen. They left in their groups and I slumped against my chair, rubbing my hands over my face. I felt drained and I just wanted to kick someone's ass, specifically Fuego. I'll be okay, we'll find him, I told myself. He's a fighter. He'll be okay, and we'll find him. The phone rung and I debated letting it ring, but with recent events I couldn't risk the fact that it might have been important. Night. Oh God, Jenna. Matt's voice came through the line and I sat up. Callie's gone. What do you mean gone? I asked, panicked. She was a very important part of the supernatural world, the only female with stronger bloodlines than me. Who knew? She might be able to shift when she got older. She's gone. We checked her when the wolf got in, but the next morning she was gone and the only scent was that of a vampire. He took her, Jenna. We have to find her. My mother has enemies. Who knows what they'll do to her? She was abused by a vampire and he nearly killed her. That's how she became a hybrid. She killed the vampire who hurt her, but he had a lot of connections. We have to find her. I felt like everything was slipping out of my control as I uttered the words I knew would lose me trust. I can't help you, Matt. My mate's missing and all my best trackers are gone. You're not going to help us? My little sister is gone, Jenna. She's just a baby. A baby. And you're just going to say, no sorry, can't help? I growled, and my fist tightened. I can't help you. My mate is missing and they're going to kill him. I'm sorry about your sister, but my mate is important to me. Give me a week and I'll send my entire pack if I have to. I growled before slamming down the phone. A week. I had a week to find Klaus. I know that if a vampire had gotten Callie, then there was little to no chance that she would be found, and right now Klaus and Fugo were my priorities. There was a knock on my door and Davy walked in. I looked up and shook my head. Why is this happening to me? I muttered. I felt her hand on my back. We'll find him, Jen. We sat in silence for a few minutes before I yawned, my eyes watering. And as my first act as your beta, I'm getting you to bed because you haven't slept in 2 days. I gave a growl, but it ended in a yawn. Don't tell me what to do, Davy, I muttered, standing despite my words. She walked me up to my room and helped me find my pajamas. She cleared a space for me on my bed that was covered in clothes and had no pillows for mine and Klaus's fight. She tucked me in and laid a kiss on my forehead before shutting the door. I tossed and turned for hours, but no matter how tired I was, I just couldn't sleep. Was I going to lose Klaus like I'd lost my dad? I remember the night I first shifted. I told him that I hated him and ran. Would it end like that with Klaus? I had just gotten him back and now it seemed that I was going to lose him again, because I did care. He'd hurt me in the past, but I loved having him around. I loved how he teased me and gave me independence. I loved fighting with him. Who am I kidding? I love Klaus. No matter how much we fight and yell and scream, I loved him. And I might never see him again. I threw back the covers and jumped out of bed as tears slid down my face. I ran to Klaus's room and jumped into his bed, wrapping myself up in the blankets that smelt so much like him. Now there's no holding back. Making to attack my blood is singing with your voice. I want to pour it out. The saints can't help me now. The ropes have been unbound. I hunt for you with bloody feet across the hallowed ground. I hit the bag. Punch after punch, until my arms hurt so much they became numb. 2 days had passed since Klaus had disappeared, and I hadn't slept more than 5 hours. I racked my brain as to where Fugo could have taken Klaus. But I didn't even know what he looked like, let alone any hideouts that he could have. I was worried sick, and I knew that the longer I waited, the nearer to death Klaus drew. Who knows? He could already be dead. There weren't many areas that he could hide an entire pack and kidnapped wolf, let alone a very strong, very angry male wolf with alpha blood. You'd have to make sure that there were no people near and that it was far away enough for the pack you were hiding from that they wouldn't think of. It'd have to have a water source and an escape route if things went bad. Wait. My eyes widened and I sprinted out of the gym, searching for Ace or someone from Klaus's pack. I searched the house from top to bottom, and I couldn't find any of them, so I ran to the training grounds. They were all sparring, going through rigorous training. I knew that Klaus's disappearance and Fugo coming after both me and the pack made them extremely mad. Guys! I shouted, running over to where their wolves stood. Where's the house you guys stayed at when I met you all? I asked, eyes wide. Why? Ace asked, the only one who hadn't shifted. Do you think Klaus could be there? I nodded. It's worth a try. I mean, if you guys lived there without my father knowing, Fugo could be there. The guys growled and stood, looking ready to kill. I want you all in my office in 20 minutes, and if any of you run off, I will find Klaus and let him deal with you himself, I told them. They all nodded, and so I walked back in silence with Ace. I wanted to go right now, but I knew that diving into a dangerous situation would be stupid, so I waited and bided my time. All 12 Rouge gathered in my office wearing basketball shorts, looking keen for a fight. We need to go into this with a plan, or at least knowing what we're going into. I need to know how many men Fugo has in his pack, how strong they are, what Fugo looks like and how dirty they fight. Fuego's a few inches taller than you. He's covered in scars, muscle and tattoos. He has a crooked nose, brown beady little eyes, and thick eyebrows. His wolf is a murky brown, like his eyes, Ace said. He's a really slipper bastard and will do anything to make you feel small. To win. To kick you and kill you when you're down. I nodded and leant back against my chair. And his pack? Are just as bad as him. He takes any men from the packs he kills who want to join, and molds him to what he thinks a man should be. To how he wants his warriors. They're ruthless bastards. No emotions other than lust, anger and malice. They do terrible things and you should never underestimate them. I want my best fighters outside the house in 10 minutes. The rest will be in lockdown with the rest of the pack. Everyone in the safe room. I ordered the entire pack. I didn't know if Hugo would show up, and I didn't want to risk the safety of my remaining pack members. They had over 300 fighters down there with them and enough food, water and air to last months. Get your asses outside for the brief. We're going to find Klaus, and we're going to find him today. Any men who do not want to fight will not be forced to, I told the men. I didn't believe in forcing them into battle. I wanted the men who had my back in a battle to be there willingly. No one will force you to stay. Leave now if you do not want to fight. To face up to Hugo and the wolves that attacked this pack and took my mate. No one moved or said anything. They all just stared at me with determined looks. Kill anyone who stand in your way. Leave no survivors. Show no mercy for they will not. I stripped and shifted, howling to the sky and taking off in the direction I knew the abandoned house was. Hugo had better be there. I took off with my men following me, but as we got further and further away from the pack house, I began pulling away from the group. The wind whipped my face as I stretched out my limbs, paws pounding against the ground. I ran hard and fast until the familiar lake came into view. I scented the clearing, and a malicious smirk came across my snout when I could literally taste the odor of over 50 male werewolves. Slowly I prowled towards the house, straining my senses to make sure that I wasn't caught off guard. Although it was a bright, beautiful day, my black coat blended into the shadows of the undergrowth as the house was soon in my sight. Men mulled around. Most naked. I could sense more within the house. There were many more. They spoke loudly, spitting, swearing, wrestling. They were a bunch of animals. Ironic, considering I was a wolf right now. I knew I was majorly outnumbered, and if I just jumped into the crowd, I'd probably kill 10 or 20 before they got me. I thought back to how I took care of those rouges at Will's old pack house and smirked. I crept close to an open window, where there were no men loitering, shifting and climbed inside. The room was empty and messy, but I managed to find a shirt in the mess and slipped into it. I crept out of the room and immediately bumped into a man. Oopies, I giggled, wrapping one arm around his neck and the other letting it run across his chest. I looked up at him through my lashes and tugged him back to the room without a word. He was a typical werewolf, strong, muscled, fairly handsome. But I could see the evil in his eyes, feel it in the hands he rested on my butt. He pushed me against a wall, attacking my lips and hoisting my legs around his waist. Jenna, where the hell are you? Matthias's angry voice asked. In the house, be careful coming in, Hugo's pack is here. I answered before feeling a heavy sensation at my lower body. I growled and wrapped my arms around his head and snapped his neck before it could go any further. His body fell limp to the floor and I stepped over it towards the door. I was mad and I wanted to kill each and every one of these men. I went from room to room, dispatching many. They were too preoccupied with themselves to notice the deaths of their pack members. I heard shouts and then frantic footsteps. Someone discovered one of the bodies, I bet. I heard footsteps running towards the room I was in and turned to face the door. It opened to reveal an angry horde of male wolves, led by a man, only a few inches taller than me, with beady little brown eyes, a crooked nose and many tattoos littering his body. Hugo. Before he could react, I had lunged for him, raking my hand over his eye, punching him in the face until blood was running down my fist. I was grabbed by both arms and hauled off the swearing bastard. Fucking bitch! He spat, holding a hand over his damaged eye, the other protecting his nose. You'll pay for that. No, Hugo. You'll be the one paying for your sins today. Not me, I said darkly. Who are you to threaten me, little girl? He asked. Obviously he hadn't done much recon as everyone knew my face. Idiot. He would know who I was once I shifted, but I was in such cramped quarters that it would be more of a hindrance than a help. I'm the little girl who's going to make sure that you never terrorize anyone again. I'm here for my mate, and my pack's pretty pissed that you attacked them." A smirk covered his face as he approached me. "Ah, Jenna Knight. I wondered when you'd get here. We're here, Alpha. How should we proceed?" Matthias asked, and from the corner of my eye I saw shapes by the window. The almost non-existent sound of dull thuds from outside as they killed Fugo's wolves outside. "Wait for my command." My head whipped to the side as Fugo slapped me in the face, hard. "I'm talking to you, bitch." I spat at him and growled. "You're such a charmer, no wonder your wife betrayed you," I said, going for a low blow. His face twisted to one of rage, and he landed a forceful blow on my midsection, making me cough in pain. I felt the grip on my arms loosen as I stood back up, and I took the opportunity, elbowing one while stepping on the other's foot. "Now," I yelled at Matthias, hitting the ground as wolves came sailing through the windows, pouring through the doors. I saw Fugo shift, and so I let myself change. My bones snapped like twigs and reformed. My nails became longer, hands transformed into paws, my face elongated and ears appeared as well as deadly sharp teeth. I grabbed Fugo and threw him out of a broken window, jumping out after him. He was going down. He stood and faced me, watching me with hate-filled eyes. I snarled and snapped at him, faking lunges and growling like a rabid animal. We lunged for each other at the same time, rearing up on our hind legs, saliva flying as I wrapped my jaws around his snout, scratching at his eyes and chest. He got a few good hits in before he managed to push me backwards, using his larger mass. I scratched at his underbelly as he tried to get to my throat, bracing my front paws against his neck as leverage. I pushed with all my might and he flew off me, crashing to the ground. All my senses were focused on Fugo. All outside sounds were drowned out, the growling inside the house, the crashing as wolves went flying, the whines of the dying. We were a tangle of fur, claws and teeth as we tumbled across the ground, ripping each other to shreds. I heard a loud growl that seemed right next to my ear, and the next moment I was being attacked from all sides. I ducked under the legs of a massive marbled wolf and stood my ground, snarling at the 4 large male wolves. I lunged for the smallest wolf, latching onto his neck and shaking my head from side to side until I'd ripped his head off his body. I dodged the wolf who tried to pin me onto top the dead wolf and jumped onto the nearest, digging my claws into his back before he bucked me over his head. I stood and tackled his face, raking my claws over his eyes when he tried to rip into me. Fugo came at me again, jumping on my back and pinning me to the ground. He latched onto my neck as I rolled over, moving before he could dig his claws into me again. I killed the wolf whose eyes I'd pulverized by disemboweling him, his blood coating my paws as I ripped his intestines out the gaping wound in his side. 2 down, 2 to go. I surprised the next wolf who tried to tackle me to the floor by shifting, wrapping my legs around his neck, and taking him to the ground with me, twisting until there was a definite crack as his spine broke. Fugo stood before me, panting, bleeding and furious. The broken bodies of his pack members surrounded us, and I gave him a feral smile. "Give it up, Fugo. You've lost, it's over," I told him, gesturing to the house behind us where I knew all his wolves were dead. It was silent, save for your heavy breaths. "You'll never hurt anyone again," he growled, and came flying towards me. I landed on my back with his huge brown wolf standing over me. "Jenna!" It was as if time slowed down, his jaws opened, dripping saliva onto my face as he went for my throat. I knew that if I didn't act fast I would be done for. I pushed myself up, grabbing both of his jaws in each hand. His teeth pierced my skin, going right to the bone as I squeezed, resisting the way he tried to shake me off. I pried his mouth open so wide his jaws popped and he whined in pain. It wasn't enough to kill him though. No, it just caused him a shit ton of pain. I thrust my whole arm into his mouth, shoving my fist down his windpipe. He began to choke on my arm as I pushed my entire body downwards, punching my way to his heart, to his lungs. I was elbow deep as I gripped the barely beating organ. Wrapping my fingers around it, I tore it out of his body and triumphantly watched as he fell limp to the floor. I held his heart in my hand, looking down at my body to see that I was covered in blood and chunks of flesh and tissue. I had scratches across my entire body, covering many scars. Open wounds bled freely on my hands, back, stomach and arms. I threw the organ to the ground in disgust, and turned around to see every single man I'd brought along, staring at me in horror, awe and finally, respect. I half limped, half ran through the crowd as I followed my nose, searching for the scent of musky vanilla and pine. It was hidden under the overwhelming scent of coppery blood and death, but I managed to pick it out. It led me to the back of the house, to a part of the exterior that was covered in vines and weeds. I pulled open the trapdoor I found buried beneath layers of shrubs and slowly walked down the rickety stairs, straining my ears for any sign of life. I heard a groan as I walked further into the darkness, the drip of a leaky pipe against the decrepit cement walls, molded and cracked. I rushed forward and got to a giant metal door that blocked my way. I used all my strength and ripped it off its hinges. Stepping into a dark room that stunk of blood, piss and fear, I could literally taste it. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I could see a figure dangling from the ceiling, suspended by chains. "Klaus," I whispered, horrified at the gaping open wounds that decorated his large body. He was naked and his head drooped to the side in exhaustion and hopelessness. It was obvious he'd soiled himself and was starving. He was so wounded, so tortured, that it was a miracle that he was alive. "Jenna?" he groaned, opening his swollen eye. I had no idea what they'd done to the other, but it looked bad. Oh God, I'd seen some pretty horrific things, done some pretty horrific things, but seeing such a proud man so degraded and hurt, it made me sick. I heard some shuffling and Ace's form came into view. "Oh God," he whispered. "No, Jenna, run, go, he'll get you, he'll hurt you." "Run," he begged with a broken sob. I shook my head and Ace held him while I broke the chains, ignoring the pain it brought me as the jagged, rusted metal broke skin. "No, Jen, no," he murmured to himself again and again as we walked to the light, the exit of this God-forsaken place. I stopped Ace and placed a hand gently on either side of Klaus's face. "Klaus, listen to me," I said gently but firmly. He opened his one good eye again and I looked into it. "It's okay now. You're safe. We've got you. Fugo and his pack are dead. You're safe," I told him, laying a soft kiss on his forehead as tears leaked from his eyes. I walked to the stairs and asked for a shirt to tie over his eyes, so that the bright light wouldn't hurt him anymore. "Someone get a car or something," I ordered, knowing that a few of the men would run back to the pack house and get something we could transport Klaus in. No way was I going to let Ace carry him the long trek back to the pack house, and he couldn't even move, let alone shift. The terrain was too dangerous for Ace to handle while carrying Klaus as well. I laid the shirt over his face, making sure that he could still breathe. "We're going home, Klaus. How did you find me?" I could barely hear him and I knew that he was fighting to stay awake. His body was shutting down and I knew that he could die. I guessed. "I know you didn't leave willingly. I know you wouldn't forsake me again." I watched as his body went limp, and I desperately looked at Ace. "Klaus, you have to stay awake, come on please," I begged, praying that he wouldn't die. We'd only just started getting alone, building a relationship, and now I was losing him, just like my father. "God damn it, Klaus, I need you." "Quit your screaming, woman," he muttered. "I'm not going anywhere." "Something tells me he's going to be all right," Ace said. "I guess that only time will tell. I'm forever yours, faithfully." "Jenna Keegan keeps stealing my pizza," Davy yelled as she ran past the door. "You're a beta. Deal with it," I yelled back, taking a bite of the delicious homemade pizza some of the pack women had made. Klaus chuckled as he took a piece from my plate, making me growl and narrow my eyes at him. "It's fine for Keegan to take Davy's, but you do not take my food or I'll toss you to the rouges." He smirked and took a big bite. "You forget I was the worst of the worst. I'm not scared of them. This is really good pizza, you know." "Then go get your own," I said, smacking away his hand. He feigned hurt and gave me puppy dog eyes. "But I thought you loved me, Jenna. I thought you cared. And sharing is caring after all." I snorted and raised an eyebrow. "Obviously I don't love you then, or care." He huffed and smirked. "That's not what you were saying last night." I simply ignored him and kept eating my pizza while watching a scary movie. Halfway through, I could feel Klaus's hand creeping up my leg as his breath hit my ear. Jenna, have you thought about going all the way? I looked at him and raised an eyebrow. Klaus, we've been intimate for the past 3 years, numerous times, in numerous places. We've already gone all the way, many, many times. 3 years had passed since Fugo tried to rip our worlds apart. It took a while for Klaus to recover after what Fugo and his pack did to him, and he still has nightmares occasionally. Life was good now, though. Both the pack and our relationship were going strong. No, by go all the way I mean letting me mark you. I froze and turned my head slowly to look at his thoughtful expression. You seriously want to mark me? Again, you do know what that would lead to, right? It would lead to a very hormonal, angry, very pregnant Jenna. When a male marks a female, it triggers something in both their bodies that it's time to start a family. Most mates mark each other and then mate, but Klaus and I aren't like most couples. I'd asked him not to mark me if he wants to keep being intimate, and I thought he was okay with the arrangement, but I guess not. I've never been romantic. I never really cared about finding my mate, and I definitely did not care about, nor want to get pregnant. I already had a pack of over 1,000 wolves to watch over, let alone a chubby-cheeked, loud baby. You really want kids? You want to get me fat and hormonal for 6 months, and then you want me to squeeze a watermelon out of me? I was just asking. I only wanted to see what you'd say. Obviously it's a no, he muttered, turning back to the screen. I sat there for 5 minutes before I switched off the screen, shut the door and straddled Klaus's lap. He held my hips, but when he looked away I growled lowly and took his head in my hands. I never thought you'd want kids. Why now all of a sudden? He looked down and shrugged. I guess I just want to start a family with you. I mean, I love you heaps, and no matter how much we fight, I always will. I treated you like crap at the start, leaving you, and I know I don't deserve the happiness I have now, but I just imagine little blue-eyed, black-haired girls running around. I sighed and rested against his chest. Klaus, I'm only 23 and we've literally got eternity plus a huge pack. That was one thing I loved. He hadn't tried to take control over the pack and just stepped back, letting me lead and offering help when I needed it. He knew that I could take care of myself, and had faith in my abilities. I know, I didn't really think of your age. You're mature, and I know that part of the reason is because it was forced onto you. I'm proud of you, Jenna, and we've got all the time in the world. I guess it can wait. Well, you know that we can always keep practicing for when the time comes. I whispered in his ear, placing a kiss on the tender skin of his neck. He groaned and coughed, clearing his throat and standing, keeping me latched onto his front like a koala. We can't. The pack is outside. I strained my hearing and heard the muffled breathing of many people right outside the door. I climbed down and slowly walked to the door. I moaned really loudly as I unlocked it. Oh God, Klaus. Oh yeah. I heard a few snickers before I pulled open the door and yelled in the scariest voice I could muster. What are you all doing? There were screams and everyone shot off. I ran after the nearest person and jumped on their back, pinning them to the floor. It turned out to be Keegan, so I gave him an evil grin and tickled him until he begged for mercy. I think he's been punished enough, Klaus said from behind me. I huffed but stood and stared around at the wolves around us, some who were laughing. Hey Alpha, can we have a barbecue tonight? A few of the teenage boys asked. I considered their question with a poker face. We'd just gotten tons of food in with a shipment, and it had been very warm lately. Perfect weather for a barbecue. If you can get the kitchen ladies to agree and find a few extra people who'll help cook up the food, then yes. They cheered and ran off with most of the other teenagers as Davy walked up to me. I heard what you guys were talking about. Klaus talked to me beforehand. It's been eating at him for weeks. I think that his wolf is urging him on a fair bit too. By urging, she meant that the emotions of his wolf were urging him to mark me and get me pregnant. It was an evolutionary thing that meant the continuation of our species. Our wolves couldn't talk to us. They were more like a being that amplified our feelings and urges. They were also like a gut instinct when things went wrong. He talked to you about it before me? I asked, feeling slightly hurt. I loved Davy like a sister, and she is the one I would rather he talk to, but I felt kind of excluded. She nodded and looked down. He didn't want to pressure you into anything or make you feel bad, but I think that Klaus is still dealing with the insecurities Fugo instilled in him. I think that it's less about having a baby, and more about knowing that you fully accepted him. I don't think he wants to voice that though. He's a man, and no matter how many times you prove that you can handle yourself, he's always going to want to protect you. I think that he still feels like he failed you when he left. Especially because of your dad, the challenge, and the hunters. You proved that you don't need him, and I guess he just wants to feel secure in the fact that you love him and have totally accepted him. Also, I think his male pride is getting to him a little. Most alphas breed like rabbits, she said, winking. I had always known that Davy sees things that most people don't, and a lot of the time she tends to sit back and just observe. Well, she proved it to me big time. He knows I love him. I've killed for him, and if I didn't care I wouldn't have rescued him. Plus, you and I both know that I'm not like other alphas. I knew that everything Davy said was true, and I had no problem with Klaus marking me. It was just the fact that I would get pregnant very easily afterwards, and I could not imagine myself as a mother. Alpha, sure, but mother, no. There were similarities and differences between taking care of a pack and taking care of a baby. For one, the pack generally looked after themselves and I didn't have to change diapers, wipe up vomit or get up at godforsaken hours of the morning to quiet them down. She nodded and we sat in silence for a while before there was a knock at the door. Hansel walked in with Ace trailing behind him, cradling their daughter. 8 months ago they adopted a beautiful little baby girl called Eve, who we'd found in the forest next to the body of her dead mother. I think a bear had gotten to her because she was torn apart. She was human and couldn't defend herself against a bear. I don't know how Eve made it, but she did. And now she was almost a year old based on how old the doctors said she was when she was found. Ace and Hansel fell in love with her the moment they saw her in the forest, and it would have been cruel to send her away. So I let them raise her within the pack. I know that she would be seen as different growing up, but she had 2 amazing fathers to comfort her. Ace and Hansel loved her like she was their own, and it made me happy to see my friends so content. Jen, the barbecue will be in an hour. It'll be a bit of a pool party from what the boys told me, and they asked that you wear one of your sexy swimsuits, Hansel said, wiggling his eyebrows. You too, Davy, he said when she chuckled. Eve began crying and I cringed. God, she was loud. Cute but very loud. I knew that she'd be a heartbreaker when she was older, with chocolate brown hair, big brown eyes, high cheekbones, big red lips, and long black eyelashes. For a human she was stunning, and if she didn't smell human I would have thought that she was a wolf. Ace hushed her, gently rubbing her back and swaying from side to side. She calmed down immediately, and I watched as both Ace and Hansel gazed lovingly at her. I cleared my throat and gestured to the door. Thanks guys, I'll see you down there. They left and I turned to look at Davy. Parenthood has turned their brains to mush. They look like lovesick puppies. She smiled and walked into my closet. Yes, but they're happy. You could have that too. I ignored her and pulled open one of the drawers, pulling out a bright red bikini. I heard Davy snooping through the drawers as I changed, and searched for a pair of shorts and a shirt to wear before I got into the pool. She opened a drawer full of my undergarments and snickered, holding a really small one up with the tip of her finger. Gee, these'll do so much good. I bet Klaus enjoys them though. I rolled my eyes and took them away from her. Go get ready, Davy, 'cause you are not wearing my bikinis, I told her, shoving her out of the room. I pulled on a pair of short frayed jeans and a crop top. My window was open and I could smell the heavenly food wafting in the summer's breeze. Shrieks and laughter filled the air as I stood watching the pack from my huge window stories up. The last few years had been good. Of course we'd had rogues and a few exchanges with other packs that harassed me about land, but life was good. Unfortunately, the Princess Callie had not been found, even with Nate and 20 of my best trackers helping to track her down. I'd had to bring my men home after a full month of no progress, because many had families to get back to. Nate was still out there though, searching for her. I had a feeling that she could have been his mate, but he hides his grief behind the facade of traveling. I knew what he was really doing though, searching for the lost princess. It was more than likely that she had died years ago, but I wasn't going to tell the royal family or Nate that. They were still devastated over the loss years later. As I watched the sun set over the mountains, a happy smile came to my face. Soon the backyard was filled with happy pack members, so I exited my apartment on the top floor and ran down the stairs. Many of the pack greeted me with a bow of their heads and an alpha. I smiled at them, and headed outside to where a long line of mostly teenage boys were surrounding the grill. My stomach growled, so I pushed past and took a bun, holding it out for a sausage. There were groans from behind me, but with one look from me they shut up. I covered the bun in hot chili and tomato sauce before heading towards the pool. Since it was so big, it was split in half by an invisible line. Teenagers in the deep end with noodles and water guns, little children and their parents in the shallow side. It worked well, and the older kids stayed out of the way of the little ones and vice versa so that no one got hurt. I strolled over to an empty lounge and sat back, soaking up the last few rays of sunshine before it was completely dark. Slowly I began to drift off until I felt someone sliding their hand up my leg as they sat beside me on the lounger. "There are kids here, Klaus," I murmured as I lazily opened my eyes. He grinned, his intense green eyes piercing what felt like my soul, and bent down to give me a soft kiss. "And males who still find their alpha too sexy for my liking." I snorted and let him slide in behind me, resting my head on his chest, his legs on either side of me. "I'm not changing, so I guess you'll have to get over it anyway. I'm with you, Klaus, not them." I watched as Hansel and Ace lounged against the edge of the pool, water just under their waists. Eve was in a little floaty toy that kept her upper body above water and allowed her to splash and kick without drowning. They gestured over to me to join them, so I stood, feeling Klaus's gaze fixed to my back as I walked. I stripped off my shorts and shirt before sliding into the freezing waters. Hansel slipped an arm around my shoulders as Ace played with Eve. "We heard about your argument," he told me quietly. I groaned and rolled my eyes. "Of course it's a hot topic through the pack, isn't it? All of your fights are. Some even bet on how long it'll last, what it's about, and how long you'll be intimate for afterwards." He chuckled. "Personally, I know they never last longer than a day, and then you're going at it like rabbits for the next 6 hours." I snorted and leant back against the edge, resting my elbows on the tiled ground. "What? You and Mr. Perfect over there don't fight?" I questioned. "Everyone fights. I and Klaus more so than others. But we love each other in the end, no matter what we say." "I know," he said with a small smile. "We all know that." I followed his gaze to see Klaus talking and laughing with a few of the warriors, beer in hand. He was devastatingly handsome and topless. His black hair was a little longer now, in need of a cut and all messed up from when he runs his hands through it. He had a few laugh lines near his eyes, but no wrinkles or any other signs of aging. Scars littered his torso, but I knew that they would fade with time, though the mental scars would stay for longer. I knew from experience. The scars I received from the hunters had begun fading, but I would have the ones on my back for centuries. Feeling my gaze, Klaus turned with a small smile. He excused himself and slowly walked over to me, his gaze running the length of my body. "Hansel, Ace," he said, greeting my betas and friends. "How's little Eve doing?" "Good. She's beginning to eat a little solid food. Do you want to hold her?" Ace offered. Klaus paused for a minute before nodding. He sat on the edge of the pool, legs dangling over the side as Ace extracted her from her floaty and handed her to Klaus. "Ah, can you show me how? I don't want to break her." Ace chuckled and placed her in Klaus's arms, showing him how to hold her, supporting her back mostly, making sure that he didn't drop her. I watched as he looked down at her with such awe as she stared at him with those big innocent brown eyes. I sucked in a breath, and he looked up to meet my gaze. He would be an amazing father someday. He gave me a small smile before passing Eve back to Ace. "I'm going to steal the big bad alpha here if you guys don't mind." Klaus held out his hand for me, so I took it, and he easily lifted me out of the water with one hand. "Care to take a long romantic stroll to the kitchen for a soda with me?" "Sure. Ace and Hansel are going to have their hands full when Eve gets older. They'll have to beat the boys off with sticks," he said as he laced his fingers with mine. I sighed and tossed a glance back over my shoulder. "I know, I just wonder if I did the right thing letting them keep the human child." "You did. She'll have a good life here, protected, safe and happy. She'll be brought up with the pack, as part of the pack, and I know that she'll be right at home. As long as she's brought up here and freely knows about us, everything will be fine. We're her family now." There was no one in the kitchen as I sat on one of the benches and watched as Klaus bent over to grab a soda, his swimming trunks showing off his toned back. He stood and turned around as my gaze snapped to his smirking face. He strolled towards me and placed the can next to me before pushing my legs apart and standing between them. I stared at his face as he did the same before I felt his hands rubbing my legs. He placed a heated kiss on my lips before moving across my chin, down my neck to where it met my shoulders. Right where he wanted to mark me. I knew things were going to get intense very fast as I wrapped my arms around his neck. "Not here, Klaus," I moaned. He scooped me up and ran upstairs, throwing me onto my bed. He continued to kiss my neck and I was getting really worked up. I knew exactly what he wanted to do, and my mind flashed back to my conversation with Davy only hours earlier. Maybe if we were careful, I wouldn't get pregnant. I know that it was a long shot and that eventually I would have to face the music when it came, but at least I know that I loved Klaus, and if I were going to have kids with anyone, it would be him. "Do it," I gasped as he peeled our clothes off and moved against me in one motion. He froze and pulled his face back, staring into my eyes with surprise. I knew that he could guess what I was saying, but I think he needed clarification. "Mark me. Are you sure?" he asked, stock still, searching my face for any sign I didn't mean it. "God damn it, yes. Now move, you bastard," I shouted at him, moving my hips. He growled down at me and accepted my challenge. The first time he marked me, neither of us were happy about it, and through his and my actions, we opened up a world of pain for both of us. Although we still fought, I did love him, and I know that he loved me, no matter what happened. That night he marked me, and although the future is uncertain, I know for sure that he would never forsake me again. All the pain and heartbreak I went through was worth even just this one moment of happiness and contentment. I was finally, truly happy. I was no longer forsaken.